My YouTube channel, Dreamland Encounters, is all about sharing real-life stories of mysterious experiences that might just help you relax and drift off to sleep. But before we get into tonight's story, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. It was late March, with that kind of cold that leaves your breath hanging in the air after sunset. I was 17 in my final year of high school in Kirkcaldy, spending a typical Friday night with 3 friends, Yuan, Grant, and Lisa. We weren't doing anything special, just sitting on a low stone wall near the coastal dunes, sharing chips from the local shop and watching the tide roll in. It was around 9:30 or 10 at night. The streetlights behind us didn't reach very far, so darkness pretty much surrounded us, except for a distant town's glow. Then something strange happened. The usual seaside wind completely died down, and an unusual silence fell over us. We'd been laughing about something Grant had said when Lisa suddenly pointed towards the water and asked about something odd. At first, I thought she meant a boat's light, but no boat was there. Instead, 3 perfectly spaced lights hovered just above the horizon, glowing a dull orange like dying coals. They were completely stationary and didn't flicker. Curious, we stood up on the wall to get a better view. They were far enough out that we couldn't tell if they were over water or in the sky. Yuan tried to film the lights with his phone, but the screen showed only black. He tried again with the flash on, but still nothing. Frustrated, he put the phone away. We watched those lights for about a minute, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. No sound, no movement. While we debated whether these could be flares or some unknown aircraft, the middle light suddenly dropped straight down into the water. Or, at least, that's how it appeared. Simultaneously, the other 2 lights blinked out, leaving only dark sea. We waited, hoping for something more to happen, but nothing did. Soon after, the wind returned abruptly, cold and salty. We decided to head home, silently agreeing not to tell our parents about this strange experience. The weekend passed normally, and by Monday morning's first period maths class, we were back to our routine. It wasn't until 3rd period English that we really started discussing what we'd seen. Night. Something wasn't right. During class, Mrs. Everything wasn't right. During class, Cowie left briefly and returned, looking unsettled, telling us to read quietly. Through the window, 2 men walked down the corridor toward the staff room. They wore black suits, pristine and sharp, as if coming straight from a funeral or court hearing. One was tall and thin, the other shorter but broader. Both had crisp white shirts and black ties. At the lockers, Lisa approached me. "Did you see those guys?" she asked. Ewan and Gran joined us, confirming they'd noticed the men too. This wasn't normal. No one dressed like that at our school, not even inspectors. Their faces were pale, hair meticulously parted. They carried no folders or clipboards. During lunch, I overheard a younger teacher whispering near the staff room. Her words made my stomach drop. They were asking if anyone had been talking about the sky. We hadn't told anyone about the lights. None of us had. When we returned to class, the men were in the hallway again, speaking quietly with Mr. Forbes, the head teacher. He looked uneasy, and they weren't smiling. As we passed, they glanced at us, not casually, but deliberately, as if mentally checking off faces. By the last period, they'd vanished. We asked an office staff member about them, but she claimed not to know, her tone suggesting she didn't want to discuss it. That night, we met at Lisa's. We were shaken by the specificity of their questions about the sky. Ewan swore he hadn't told anyone about the lights, and we were certain none of us had posted online. Strange occurrences followed. A black car parked across from the school during lunch breaks, engine off, windows up. The driver never emerged. When Gran tried getting closer, it drove away slowly, not frantically. My phone started acting weird. During a call with Yuan, faint clicking sounds interrupted us. The screen recording app opened unprompted. Lisa mentioned her mom answered the house phone one night to only hear breathing. Something was definitely happening. Now, I was halfway up the trail to Arthur's Seat when I noticed something unusual. A bright object was hovering just above the eastern slope, completely still and symmetrical. The sky that day was a pale winter blue, with the city feeling washed out and quiet after the snow had melted. My habit of carrying a camera meant I could capture this moment, even though taking photos up here was more of a routine than a serious hobby. At first, I thought it might be a drone or one of those new weather balloons everyone had been talking about, but it didn't behave like either of those. Something about its stillness and the way it didn't reflect sunlight like the surrounding landscape felt off. I carefully snapped a few photos, holding my breath to ensure sharp focus. The city noise seemed to fade into a background hum, and the air felt thicker somehow. I watched for a few minutes, but the object remained perfectly motionless. Then, in an instant, it was gone. No fading, no movement, just disappeared. Back home, I examined the photos on my computer. Incredibly, the object was clearly visible in several shots, right against the trees just as I'd seen it. Each time I zoomed in and adjusted the contrast, it reappeared distinctly. I didn't tell anyone about this right away. The next morning, I arrived early at my small, independent design studio. This wasn't the first strange encounter. About 2 weeks earlier, walking home after dark, I thought I saw two men across the street near the bus stop. They wore the same suits, stood in the same stance, looking straight ahead. When a car passed between us, they vanished. I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it. We had returned to the coastal path where we'd originally seen strange lights, but we couldn't relax. Every sound felt amplified: the gulls, the wind, distant traffic. We left after just 10 minutes, seeing nothing unusual. Now, whenever someone mentions inspectors or visitors at the school, I think of those two men in black suits who seemed to know about something in the sky before anyone had spoken a word. Even now, when I drive that way at night, I find myself scanning the horizon for those mysterious orange glows. I was just settling in, computer booted up, when two men in crisp black suits entered. Their white shirts and ties were plain, and their shoes gleamed so brightly they reflected light across the creaky, exposed brick floor. "Good morning," said the taller man, his voice controlled and even. "We need to inspect your camera for errors." I froze, confused. "My camera?" I stammered, glancing at the bag on my desk. He simply nodded. "Please." As I reached for the bag, he stepped closer, silent, expressionless. His shorter companion remained quiet, his eyes methodically scanning every inch of the office. Their gaze felt calculated, measuring distances between my desk and window, analyzing monitor angles, assessing the entire room's layout. Something about their presence felt heavy, compelling me to comply despite my reservations. They handled my camera quickly, turning the lens and pressing buttons in a way that seemed peculiar. Whenever I tried to look at the screen, they would subtly shift, blocking my view. After a few minutes, they exchanged a knowing glance. "Errors noted," the tall man said. "That will suffice." Then they vanished as abruptly as they'd arrived. No goodbye, no explanation, no trace on the dusty floor. My heart raced as I stared at the door, waiting for some rational follow-up that never came. That evening, I went home and meticulously checked my photos. The mysterious object was gone. Images that had clearly shown a bright shape hovering above a slope were now empty, same clouds, same sun position, but no unusual element. I tried everything, different programs, another computer, my backup memory card. Each time, the image was missing. I began to doubt my own memory. Had I imagined it? But my original backup files from the night before had been intact, showing the object clearly. Now, even those had changed. Desperate for confirmation, I called my friend Mark, a hobbyist photographer. I described the photos and the strange visitors in detail. He suggested a lens flare, but something told me this was different. Something more. In the following week, odd details began emerging. Black cars with tinted windows started appearing near my studio vehicles I'd never seen before. Figures in long coats lingered just outside my peripheral vision. Something was happening, and I knew those men in suits were connected. Nuncoats at the edge of the street, watching intently, perfectly still. Then, vanishing the moment I looked directly at them, rational explanations felt increasingly fragile. The camera incident, the missing object, the silence of the men in black, all of these chipped away at my attempts to dismiss what I was experiencing. One night, I returned to Arthur's Seat, seeking grounding and hoping to capture another piece of evidence. City lights twinkled below, mist rolling across the hills in patches. My camera remained ready, eyes constantly scanning. Nothing appeared, no bright shape, no drone, no flare. Yet the sensation of being watched returned, subtle but persistent. Every shadow at the edge of my vision seemed exaggerated. Slight movements in the fog felt like intrusions. Since that night, I've never left my camera unattended, either in the office or at home. I rarely discuss the incident, knowing how impossible it sounds. Sometimes I still review backup files, hoping the object might reappear, that some error might reverse itself. It never does. I can't explain their arrival or why the photos changed, only that they did. The men in black, if that's truly what they were, never returned. But I remain vigilant. On clear days, when the city stretches below and wind cuts across the hill, I wonder, is something watching from the mist, keeping count? It's a quiet dread that doesn't scream but lingers, settling in your chest and making you question the ordinary. I continue taking photos. I continue climbing the hill. Because some things, once noticed, never truly leave you alone. It happened on a wet Tuesday night in late September. Driving home in my old white transit van, heading south on the A9 near Perth. Rain had been falling steadily all afternoon, that fine, misty precipitation that doesn't look substantial until it soaks through your clothing. The road was mostly empty, occasional lorries breaking the monotony. Around 9 o'clock, I glanced at the dashboard clock. Just past the Langkardi turnoff, a light caught my eye in the side mirror. Initially, I assumed it was a motorcycle, a single headlight bouncing through darkness. But something felt off. Its movement was too consistent, too steady. No wobble, no variation in height. The glow wasn't the harsh white of an LED, but softer, almost pale. And I was driving late at night on an empty stretch of road when something strange happened. A light appeared behind me, perfectly matching my van's speed. As I adjusted between 70 and 75, I knew the speed limit for vans was 60, but the road was long and deserted. The light stayed exactly with me, never wavering. Rain blurred my windscreen, leaving only a pale glow visible in my rearview mirror. My hands grew sweaty on the steering wheel. I wondered briefly if it could be a drone, though that seemed impossible given the weather and speed. My speedometer needle sat at 72, and I kept glancing at it, like an anchor in this surreal moment. The van's engine sounded normal, but the light behind me was peculiar. It didn't reflect on any surface, just hovering silently. When I needed to overtake a slower car, the light smoothly shifted position, now aligning with my left rear quarter. Approaching the Broxton roundabout, the light suddenly vanished. One moment it was there, the next completely gone. I slowed down, expecting its return, but nothing happened. By the time I reached home in Craigie, I'd rationalized it as a strange reflection or misunderstood vehicle light. 3 days later, 2 men appeared at my garage. I worked part-time from a small unit behind an industrial estate. They arrived without a visible vehicle, dressed identically in dark suits with white shirts and thin black ties. Despite the morning drizzle, they weren't wet. Their polished shoes showed no mud. One was tall, around 6'2" pass, with a narrow face and slicked-back dark hair. The other was shorter, with a rounder head and nearly invisible pale eyebrows. Both looked to be in their mid-40s. The taller man spoke first, his voice unnervingly flat, like a rehearsed script. "Has your speedometer stopped at 72? He asked. When he spoke, I said, "What?" he repeated, himself slower his time. "Did your speedometer stop at 72? "No." "Hello." No name, no details. I chuckled nervously. "Stopped?" "No, working fine." He tilted his head slightly, bird-like. "You're sure?" More a statement than a question. The shorter one remained silent, staring directly at me. His light, maybe grey eyes held something that made me wanna look away. His face completely blank. No emotion, no reaction. I asked if Hay needed help. "This is a garage," I explained, wrying, sound casual. "Car ruble?" No response. They surveyed the entire unit methodically, scanning racks of eyes, oil drums, he floor finally, he alla woman's. I stammered, "What? Who?" She'd already earned her companion. They exchanged a look I couldn't decipher. With a warning, Hay walked out. I followed doorway bull by he and me. I stepped outside. Hey were already halfway down Elaine Wood He Street. No vehicle, no umbrella. Jew walking perfectly in sync, away from he property. I watched until Hay disappeared around he corner. Back inside, my phone screen was black despite charging. Wouldn't activate for a full minute. No calls came to Moha, morning unusual for a Friday. He rest of headache passed, working on a fiesta, rying no dwell on he encounter. Small oddities lingered. A warm electronic smell near he shoe is even unplugged. A customer mentioned woe council workers asking about me, but he council denied sending anyone. Driving home, night, I compulsively checked mirrors, only rain and my headlights. Weeks passed. Minor weirdness continued. He van's dash clock random me woe hours slow one morning, battery fine. I asked my wife about resetting she hadn't. I started keeping he van locked inside instead of on he street. Some nights, a black car, an older Jaguar, seemed parked near he estate when I closed up. Brew every dime I read a G. Closer, I vanished before I reached he road. I kept a full story quiet for a while. Drones, inspectors, why old people asking about. He strange men and he mysterious orb. Late one Thursday night about a month ago, everything changed. My cottage sits just outside Lowick, nestled at the edge of a sheep pasture where silence reigns, even by Shetland's quiet standards. No streetlights interrupt the darkness, just sea wind and occasional passing cars. That night, I was outside with a mug of tea, cooling off after working on my boat engine. Near midnight, something caught my eye. At first I thought they were satellites, tiny moving dots in the sky, but these weren't normal. They darted with impossible speed, stopping abruptly, moving in ways no aircraft could. 3 or 4 white lights flickered, not bright, but like distant stars being pulled by invisible strings. One zipped across the entire sky in less than a second, then halted completely. I remember standing there, frozen, watching. The lights danced, forming a triangle, then splitting apart. No sound, no trails. Just an unexplained aerial display moving faster than anything I'd ever witnessed. I tried grabbing my phone, but by the time I returned, the sky was empty. I didn't tell anyone, not out of fear, but because I knew how crazy it would sound. My neighbor Callum would have just laughed it off as local folklore or military exercises. A week later, something stranger happened. A peculiar knock came at my door, 3 even taps or pause, then 2 more. When I opened it, 2 men in plain black suits stood before me. No car, no footprints on the wet gravel. Their clothes looked impossibly dry. The taller one spoke first, his voice completely flat. "Have you heard the clicking noise?" No introduction, no pleasantries, just that direct question. Now, whenever I drive and the speedometer approaches 72, my palm starts sweating. The road near Lardy feels different. I keep checking my mirrors, waiting for that pale glow to reappear. It hasn't, but I always ease back down to 60 without even thinking about it. No, 2 men showed up at my door. The shorter one hung back while the taller one spoke. "Did you hear it during the event?" I said. "What event?" My stomach was sinking. I hadn't told anyone about the lights, not a single person. My wife works on the mainland most weeks and wasn't home that night. The only living thing nearby was the neighbor's collie. These men seemed to know something. I told them I hadn't heard anything. The taller one tilted his head like a bird listening. "No clicks at all?" he asked, though it didn't sound like a question. I said, "No." The shorter man just stood there staring at me, his face completely blank. His pale grey or blue eyes didn't seem to focus anywhere. I asked if they were with the council. "Is this about the pasture?" I said, "or the boat?" They didn't answer. The taller one looked past me into the hallway, scanning my walls. Then he said precisely, "If you notice the clicking, note the intervals." They turned simultaneously and walked down the gravel drive. By the time I got my boots on and stepped outside, they were gone. The drive is long and straight with a clear view to the road. Nothing was there. No car, no van, just drizzle and gulls. That night was the first time I noticed it. Lying in bed, everything silent, only wind against the window. Then a faint click, not constant or regular, but like a fingernail tapping once on glass somewhere in the room. I checked everything, boiler, fuse box, fridge, nothing. The cottage was silent. But when I lay back down, another click would come. I didn't sleep much. Every time I thought it had stopped, it would start again. Sometimes a single sharp tick, sometimes a little cluster like an incomprehensible Morse code. The next day, I tried recording it on my phone, but when I played it back, there was nothing, just room noise. For a week, it continued. No men in suits, no lights in the sky, just faint clicks in the silence. I stopped mentioning it out loud. I didn't want to make it real. I even turned on the radio at night to drown it out, but when I switched it off to sleep, The clicks returned, softer, but still present. One evening, I saw a dark car parked down by the lane where it meets the main road. An old Jaguar, black paint, with no readable plates. It was facing toward my cottage. When I stepped outside, it rolled off slowly. No lights. The sheep didn't even stir. 2 nights later, I woke up at 3 a.m. and found my kitchen light on. That's unusual for me. I never leave it on. My back door was locked, but the bolt was in the opposite position from how I normally set it. Nothing was missing, just small things slightly out of place. My mug from the sink was now on the table. My boots by the door had been turned to face outward. Since then, the clicking sound has changed. It's less random now and more like a pattern. Sometimes it's 3 quick taps, then a pause, then 2. Exactly like the knock at the door that day. I haven't seen the men again, but when I go out at night to smoke, I feel like someone's watching from the dark edge of the pasture. No movement, no shapes, just that feeling. I've started sleeping with earplugs. It doesn't help. The clicks are faint, but seem closer now, like they're inside the room instead of outside. I haven't told Callum or anyone else. I wouldn't even know how to explain it. It's been 3 weeks since they came to the door. No follow-up, no letters, nothing. Just the same question echoing in my head. Have you heard the clicking noise? Because now I have. And once you've heard it, you can't stop noticing it. Late October, I was alone camping near Loch Lomond. The weather was typical. Cold, damp, with fog rolling in off the water in waves. I'd chosen a small clearing near the northern shore, just far enough from the main parking area to feel private. My plan was simple. Set up the tent, make a fire, spend the night reading and listening to the lake. By 8 p.m., I'd finished setting up. The fog had thickened. The lake was a flat, dark sheet reflecting nothing. I had the fire going, kettle on the edge of the stones, leaning back in my folding chair when I noticed the lights. At first, I thought it was another camper on the opposite shore. 2 small, bright white dots, almost like headlamps, bobbing slightly. But as I watched, the dots didn't move. They stayed in the same place. They were definitely human-sized, standing upright. The more I looked, the more certain I became. 2 men in dark suits, standing perfectly still, just beyond the water, where there was no path, no road, no dock. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing reflections in the fog. But when I looked again, they were still there. The wind pushed the fog around them, making their shapes appear. The fog rolled heavy over the water, and the fire crackled lower as hours passed. I couldn't make out their faces, just the outline of their bodies, tall, rigid, unnatural in their stillness. I tried to ignore them, telling myself I must be imagining things. At first, I poured some water into my kettle and leaned back, staring at the fire. But I couldn't stop sneaking glances. They didn't move. They didn't speak. Nothing changed except the growing thickness of the mist. For a moment, I thought I saw one of them shift slightly, but it might have been a trick of the fog. Calling out felt wrong, like speaking would break some unspoken rule. It wasn't traditional fear I felt, but an unsettling awareness that I was being observed, that my presence mattered in a way I couldn't comprehend. By 3 in the morning, the fog was so thick I could barely see the shoreline. When I finally grabbed my flashlight and swept its beam across the landscape, the men were gone, not hidden, completely absent. I stood up shivering, searching the trees. Nothing. Then I heard it. Leaves crunching, faint but steady, emerging from the tree line along the water. 2 figures appeared where no path existed, walking upright and deliberate toward a point hundreds of yards away before vanishing behind another line of trees. Their black silhouettes blended into the night, leaving no trace. By dawn, the lifting fog revealed nothing. No crushed grass, no mud prints, not even broken twigs. The ground was untouched. I packed slowly, half expecting their return, half expecting someone to interrupt my solitude. Driving back to my flat in Glasgow, I kept checking the rearview mirror. I passed the same stretch of loch without seeing anything. By the time I reached the city, the entire experience felt dreamlike. Something I was meant to forget, or perhaps never truly witnessed. No late October brought those damp nights where the air feels heavy and stars look smeared, like they're just behind a film of mist. My farm sits about 15 miles outside in Essay, with a few fields, a barn, and a stone farmhouse that's been in my family since my grandfather's time. Around midnight, I went out to check the north field because the sheep had been restless earlier in the evening. That's when I saw it. the glow hovering just above the tree line at the far end of the field. At first, I thought it was a helicopter or maybe a searchlight from some event in town, but there was no sound, not even the distant hum you'd expect from a rotor or an engine. It wasn't a beam of light either. The glow seemed contained, like it was part of a solid shape, but the shape itself was hard to pin down. I've tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe it was another camper, some prank, or a trick of the fog in my own imagination. I tried talking to friends about it, but most dismissed it, probably just other campers or fog playing tricks. But I know what I saw. I camp often, usually alone, and I've never seen anyone appear or disappear like that. The way they appeared, the way they disappeared, the fact that no path or boat could have brought them here, it doesn't make sense. I don't know what they were doing or why they were watching me, but I do know one thing. Whatever it was, they had been waiting, and somehow I had stumbled into their observation. Weeks later, I returned to the loch, this time in daylight, and retraced my route to the clearing. The shoreline was empty. The trees were the same. There was nothing to suggest that anyone had been here at all. I never saw the figures again. I haven't seen anyone in a black suit since, and I haven't returned to that campsite at night. But sometimes, driving along the A82 after work, when the light hits the water in a certain way, I catch a shadow or a flicker in the corner of my eye, and I swear I see them standing at the edge of the loch, still watching. I tell the story only now because it's been years and it stayed with me, tucked into the back of my mind where I can't quite reach it. Some nights I still picture them out there, black shapes in the fog, patient and motionless, waiting for someone else to notice. Even writing this, I checked the windows, half expecting to see them on the far shore, standing silently, staring back. The sheep were unusually quiet, pressed together near the barn like stones. The landscape shifted between oval and triangular shapes as I moved my head. A weird pressure filled my ears, similar to the sensation just before diving underwater, faint and pulsing. After about 30 seconds, the mysterious glow dimmed, drifted slowly westward, and then blinked out completely. I scanned the dark sky for another 20 minutes, but nothing returned. Back in the kitchen, I made a note about the time and direction of the event, deciding not to tell anyone. The next morning around 7, I stepped outside to feed the animals. A highland fog clung to the ground like wet cloth. That's when I spotted them. 2 men in black suits stood at the far edge of my property, just past the stone wall on the rise overlooking the north field. They were motionless. No weight shifting, no adjusting, no visible breathing, just statues emerging from the fog. Something felt distinctly off about their presence. Their stillness was unnatural, especially on this damp hillside. From a distance, I caught glimpses of pale skin, dark hair, and what might have been sunglasses. My gut instinct warned me against calling out. I busied myself with feed buckets, stealing occasional glances. 10 minutes passed and they remained fixated on the sky, unmoving. At one point I turned my back to enter the barn for another feed sack. When I returned moments later, they had vanished. No car, no footprints on the damp grass, just an empty hillside and rolling fog. Walking to their previous spot, my heart racing, I noticed the grass was flattened where they had stood. I scanned the fields, lane, and small road running parallel to my land. Nothing. The sheep, previously quiet, were now restless, having moved to the opposite end of the field. Their behavior only heightened the strangeness of the morning's encounter. Here's the rewritten text. The north field felt different that morning. The sheep were tightly clustered, their backs turned away from where 2 men had previously stood. Throughout the day, I couldn't stop checking that spot. Bear, my normally fearless dog, refused to go near the field. He stood at the barn door, tail down, even ignoring my calls, and unwilling to cross the fence line. Something felt off. When night fell and mist rolled in with the stars, a soft, rhythmic pressure returned to my ears, like a pulse underwater. The sky was empty. Sheep huddled close to the barn while I watched from inside, lights off, scanning the property's edge for any movement. For 3 consecutive mornings, I checked the field at dawn. No suited men appeared. No unusual glow hovered above the trees. But the sheep remained strange. They'd step into the north field, then quickly back away, bunching together as if an invisible barrier blocked their path. By week's end, I stopped trying to understand. I fenced the area off and left it empty. Standing at the field's edge felt like walking into air slightly heavier than normal. A quiet pressure seemed to press against my skin. I never saw those men again. I still don't know how they arrived or where they went. I've encountered strangers on my land before, lost hikers, surveyors, kids on bikes, but nothing like this. Nothing comparable to two silent men in black suits staring at the sky through the mist. Nothing that could leave an entire field feeling so fundamentally wrong for days afterward. Now, whenever I step outside at night, I catch myself looking toward that tree line, half expecting the strange glow to return, half expecting those two figures to reappear, not looking at me, but watching something else entirely. It was late November, one of those cold, damp nights where wet tarmac and chimney smoke lingered in the air. Claire, my girlfriend at the time, had just moved into a small terrace house on Dundee's outskirts. We'd spent the entire evening unpacking boxes, finishing well after midnight. Her street was typical of residential areas, a short road ending abruptly, lined with old brick houses and narrow pavements. A single orange street light marked a corner. We stepped outside for some. The silence was unusual. Normally, distant car sounds or a barking dog would break the quiet, but everything was unnaturally still. Claire lit her cigarette and motioned for me to look up. Above the rooftops, not far overhead, a triangular shape hung in the darkness. The night sky surrounded us, and in front of us hung something strange, a white object marked with 3 corner points and a faint red glow in the center. It wasn't massive, but close enough for us to make out its darker edges against the darkness. The thing just suspended there, completely still. Without thinking, we found ourselves whispering to each other. Claire tried to capture it on her phone, but the screen remained black, refusing to record anything. She attempted twice before giving up. As we watched, the red center pulsed once, then the corner lights blinked in sequence. 1, 2, 3, like stage running lights. This happened twice before everything went completely dark. There was no dramatic departure, no sudden movement. It simply vanished. We stood shivering, staring at the empty sky until Claire murmured, "Let's go inside." That night, sleep eluded us both. We told no one, not neighbors, not family. We barely discussed it between ourselves. A week later, at the bus stop on the high street around 6 p.m. with the pavement slick from earlier drizzle, a man approached us. He wore a black overcoat with a black suit, white shirt, and black tie visible underneath. Neat, clean-shaven, hands in his pockets. He seemed unbothered by the cold. Without greeting or small talk, he stopped near us and looked directly at Claire, then at me. His question was precise. Did the lights blink in sequence? I hesitated, processing his words. Claire started to respond, but before she could, he turned and walked away, not hurriedly, just calmly strolling back from where he'd come, shoes clicking on the wet pavement. He never looked back. We sat frozen. The bus came and went. When we finally spoke, Claire's only words were, "How did he know?" Strange occurrences began to follow. One evening, leaving Claire's place, I noticed a black car parked at the street's end. Engine off, windows tinted, the driver's silhouette barely visible. As I approached, it started moving, slowly, deliberately, as if it had been waiting. Here's the rewritten text. Night brought strange occurrences that defied explanation. Claire's landline would ring, but silence greeted her each time. Faint clicking sounds whispered through the receiver, like an old tape recorder struggling to communicate something unknown. One evening, I woke on her sofa and caught a glimpse of white light filtering through the curtains. No engine sounds accompanied the brightness. When I pulled back the drapes, the street stood empty. The triangular craft had vanished. We never saw the craft again, nor did we see the man directly. Weeks later, at our usual bus stop, I spotted a tall figure at the street's end. Dressed in a black coat, hands tucked into pockets, he remained motionless under a street lamp. When a passing bus momentarily blocked my view, he disappeared without a trace. Theories ran through my mind. Was it a new type of drone? Had someone overheard our conversation? Nothing made sense. We'd been completely alone during the craft's appearance, and we hadn't told a soul. Claire swore she'd mentioned nothing to anyone. By January, Claire moved closer to the city centre. The mysterious car stopped appearing, and the phone calls ceased. No explanation ever emerged. Now, waiting for buses at night, I can't help scanning my surroundings. I half expect a man in a black suit to approach with a question I'll never understand. My encounter happened just after midnight, driving home from a friend's place near Stirling. Thin mist covered the hills, and my headlights cut through the fog. I was cautious, still rattled from recently swerving to avoid a deer. Between the village and city outskirts, something unusual caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a shadow or fallen branch. Then it moved, crossing the road slowly, deliberately, without a sound. A black shape glided low, its edges absorbing my headlights differently from any normal object. I instinctively slammed the brakes, heart racing. It didn't react like an animal. Instead, it smoothly traversed the road and disappeared into the mist. Sitting frozen, I questioned my perception. Had my eyes played tricks? I told no one, not friends, not my partner. Who would believe such a story? I continued driving home, taking each mile carefully, repeatedly checking the rearview mirror. The mist crept along the streets outside as I tried to settle in for a late dinner. The radiator hummed, and I had just sat down when a slow, deliberate knock interrupted the silence. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most visitors would either call ahead or simply enter, so these two men were unusual from the start. Dressed identically in black suits, white shirts, and polished shoes that caught the hallway light, they stood with expressionless faces in the porch's glow. "Good evening," one said evenly. "Is your vehicle still functioning?" The question caught me off guard. My car was fine, as far as I knew. Yet something in his tone suggested he already knew more than he was saying. "Yes," I managed, my voice higher than usual. They nodded slightly, offering no further explanation. The shorter man studied me from head to toe, not threateningly, just observing. Before I could ask what was happening, they turned and vanished into the fog. No car started, no footsteps faded. They were simply gone. In the nights that followed, strange occurrences multiplied. Street lights flickered at odd intervals. Shadows without source danced at my peripheral vision. I heard distant car engines that disappeared when I looked. Dark figures seemed to move behind the mist at the street's edge, but always vanished when I tried to investigate. My unease wasn't pure terror, but a deep vibration that burrowed into my chest. Something was watching. This feeling extended beyond my flat. During my commute, I began noticing black cars parked in peculiar locations. Older sedans with tinted windows so dark you couldn't see inside. Always present, yet seemingly empty. I started locking doors multiple times each night, checking windows repeatedly. The sensation of being observed grew heavier, more persistent. Something was happening, though I couldn't explain what. Now here's the rewritten text. Late autumn had settled in, with radiators clicking and hissing most nights. I'd been on local radio recently during one of those slow news segments where Graham was talking about strange sky sightings. Something had been brewing in my mind since 2 weeks earlier when I'd walked home from the pub, cutting across the park near the canal. Looking up that night, I'd seen a line of lights hanging low and moving slowly. Not like a plane. I know planes. These were different. Too quiet, too close, with lights that didn't match any aircraft I recognized. My encounters started becoming strange after that. I began logging odd experiences in my phone, trying to track each unusual moment. But even that felt weird. Sometimes I'd scroll back and find entries I didn't remember writing. Notes in my own handwriting describing times and places I wasn't certain I'd been. I wondered if I was sleepwalking or dozing off while driving. Nothing bad had happened. No accidents, no bruises, just a persistent sense of disorientation. One foggy grocery trip particularly unnerved me. The mist was thick, hugging the road. Suddenly, I saw that same low black shape crossing in front of my car, moving silently between fog and headlights, like something from another world. I slammed the brakes, and it vanished without a trace. That night, sleeplessness consumed me. I stared at my car in the driveway, barely visible in the dim streetlight, imagining someone watching, checking if it still worked. Every house, creak and wind gust felt like a warning. I started driving less at night, avoiding certain roads, keeping windows closed. The men in black never returned. No knocking, no watching. The black shape didn't reappear, at least not where I could see it. But the memory lingers. Late at night, when I look at the driveway or watch mist rolling over hills, that weight returns, like someone is methodically checking everything is in order. And deep down, I know their questions about my vehicle were never really about the car itself. Here's the rewritten text. Something strange happened to me 3 nights after my radio call with Graham. Around 10 p.m., an unexpected knock came at my door. I wasn't expecting visitors that late. When I opened it, a tall stranger stood before me, a man I'd never seen before. He was imposing, easily 6'2", dirty-dressed, in a black suit with a white shirt buttoned all the way up, no tie. His appearance was striking: pale skin, narrow face, dark hair combed flat. He looked to be in his early 40s, though it is hard to pinpoint exactly. What struck me most were his eyes, not their color, but how unnaturally he held them on me. Unblinking. Fixed. As if he was trying to understand how eye contact worked but wasn't quite getting it right. "Mr. Harker," he said. I nodded, confirming my name. He didn't introduce himself or offer a handshake. Instead, he just stood there until I stepped aside, letting him enter. His movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, each step measured, calculated. Inside my living room, he surveyed everything: books on the shelf, a half-empty water glass, a pile of unopened mail. Then he turned to me and spoke with an eerie calmness. "You described lights in the sky. I want to know about the sound patterns you noticed." This caught me off guard. I hadn't mentioned any sounds to anyone, not on the radio, not to Graham, not to anybody. The entire experience had been remarkably quiet. I explained this to him, emphasizing how silent the event had been. But he seemed skeptical, tilting his head as if I wasn't telling the whole truth. Days earlier, I'd seen something unusual: 6 or 7 white spheres, glowing and shifting, seemingly connected by an invisible force. They hung in the sky for about 30 seconds before tilting and sliding behind the clouds. No sound, no trail, just gone. When I repeated to the stranger that there was no sound, no hum, no vibration, nothing, he continued staring. Then, without asking, he sat in my armchair. His movements were stiff, almost like he was practicing how humans might sit. People were sitting around and I could tell they hadn't practiced much. He folded his hands on his knees and began asking me to describe the exact arrangement of the lights in great detail. I tried my best to explain, but he kept interrupting with specific questions about whether the lights pulsed in sequence, overlapped, or if their brightness shifted in cycles. Those precise words, pulses and cycles, started to make me uneasy. He wasn't threatening exactly, but something about his intense focus on minute details I hadn't even considered made me nervous. What was especially strange was that he wasn't taking any notes. No notebook, no phone, nothing, just sitting and staring, asking questions. At one point, he caught me off guard by asking if I'd experienced any unusual dreams since the sighting. I said no, but the truth was more complicated. I'd been waking up suddenly in the middle of the night, sitting upright in bed with my heart racing. I had no memory of what I'd been dreaming about, and I didn't share this with him. After about 20 minutes, he stood up abruptly. No goodbye, no thank you. He simply said, "If you notice the sounds, you will know what they mean." Then he walked to the door, opened it himself, and stepped into the hallway. I followed, more to ensure he was leaving than anything else. He descended the stairs slowly, with an almost mechanical carefulness. Leaning over the railing, I expected to hear the front door open when he reached the bottom, but there was only silence. I waited a full minute, then went down after him. The entryway was empty, and the street outside was quiet, with just one car parked under the street lamp. There was no sign of him walking away. That night, sleep eluded me. I kept replaying our conversation, especially his cryptic line about sound patterns. It felt like he knew something I didn't. The more I thought about it, the more I wondered if there had been a sound that night in the park, something too faint for me to register, or perhaps he was deliberately planting this idea in my mind. The strangest part came a week later. While brushing my teeth with the bathroom window slightly open, I heard a low, steady hum. At first I thought it was the boiler or distant traffic, but it wasn't. The sound was deeper, more even, almost like standing next to an electric transformer, except it was coming from outside. I turned off the tap and stood listening. The hum continued for about a minute before fading completely. Racing to the window, I looked down at the street. Nothing unusual. Just the same cars, the same empty pavement. I never saw the man again. Not working nights at St. Cuthbert's, a small regional hospital outside Manchester. wasn't usually exciting. 6 years ago, our facility typically saw older patients with standard emergencies, falls, respiratory issues, nothing out of the ordinary. That changed one night around 1:30 in the morning when paramedics brought in Alan Webster, a wiry man in his late 30s. He was still wearing muddy boots and a jacket that smelled of wood smoke. He'd collapsed in a field after calling emergency services himself while walking his dog. Webster's vitals were stable, but something was clearly wrong. He was pale, shaking, and kept repeating the same phrases. I was right above me. I couldn't move. The lights were everywhere. The paramedic dismissed it, rolling his eyes and muttering about late-night television. We admitted him overnight for observation. As I settled him in, he continually tried to sit up, craning his neck toward the window like he expected something to still be there. His dog had run off and hadn't returned. When I asked what he'd seen, he described a silent disk of light circling over the tree line. No sound at all, he emphasized. His speech was slurred. He explained blacking out when something moved overhead and momentarily losing sensation in his hands. As a nurse, I logged these details clinically, though part of me suspected stress or dehydration might be causing his strange account. Around 3 a.m., while I was charting at the nurse's station, 2 men in black suits entered the ward. This immediately struck me as odd. At that hour, all entrances were supposed to be locked, requiring visitors to buzz the front desk. The men moved with an unsettling precision, their pace synchronized, no wasted motion. One was shorter, bald, with pale skin. The other was taller, dark-haired, looking to be in his early 40s. They walked directly to the desk and, in a completely flat tone, the shorter man asked, "Where is Mr. Alan Webster?" 2 men appeared, watching me intently. They claimed to be from administration, but something felt off. The taller one's accent sounded like he'd learned English phonetically. When they demanded to see Mr. Steele, Webster, their tone made my stomach churn. Against my better judgment, I gave them his room number, but said I'd check with the charge nurse first. They didn't wait, walking past me in perfect synchronization. Their footsteps echoed down the hallway. By the time I reached Alan's room, the door was closed. Through the glass, I saw them flanking his bed. Alan was awake, his eyes darting between them. His mouth moved rapidly, though I couldn't hear what he was saying. One man held a notepad but wasn't writing. When I tapped the door, no one turned, except Alan, who gave me a terrified glance before the taller man leaned in and said something, making Alan's face go blank. After about 10 minutes, they emerged. I tried to ask for identification, but the taller man simply stated, "He has been discharged." No paperwork, no consultation, just those words. I rushed into the room. Alan was gone. His bed was empty, sheets pulled back. His clothes and boots had vanished too. I searched the room, then the hallway. Spinning around, I was ready to chase them, but the corridor was empty. I raced to the stairwell and lobby. Nothing. Security confirmed no one had entered through the front doors in the last half hour. By morning, things got worse. Alan's admission record had disappeared from the system. No file, no wristband. When I inquired, they claimed the patient number I mentioned didn't exist. The paramedics who'd brought him in denied transporting anyone by that name. I checked the incident book myself. The entry I'd written at 1:45 a.m. for Alan Webster had vanished. No, I was out on Loch Rannoch one August evening just after the sun had dropped behind the hills. The sky was clear, the water black with small ripples catching the last glints of light. My shift at the hospital had been strange lately. There was something off about Alan Webster's case. When I asked other nurses about him, most acted like I was mixing him up with another patient. Only Claire, one of the night aides, quietly told me she'd seen 2 men leave his room. Alan was walking between them, unsteady, almost like he was sleepwalking. But when we checked the CCTV from the ward corridor, there was a gap. Exactly 15 minutes of blank footage covering the time they'd been there. No one filed a discharge. No doctor signed off. Officially, Alan Webster was never admitted. That was the end of it, at least on paper. For weeks afterward, I noticed little things. The stairwell light on my floor would flicker only when I was alone. The automatic doors at the front sometimes opened for no reason at 3 o'clock or 4 a.m. Once, leaving my shift near dawn, I saw a black sedan idling across the street, windows tinted. When I turned to look directly at it, It drove away slowly without turning on its headlights. I never saw Alan again. I'd been fishing that area for years. Nothing special, just hoping to get a trout or two for dinner. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. I remember casting my line near the far side of the dock when the water below started moving in a way that didn't make sense. No ripples from wind or a fish, something deeper. The soft glow appeared under the surface, shifting slowly like it was following some pattern beneath the lock. At first, I thought it might be an optical trick, the reflection of a distant lighthouse or a boat light. But there wasn't anything out there. The glow kept moving slow and steady, and I noticed it would circle in almost perfect arcs, sometimes disappearing, sometimes returning a few feet over. I fished longer than I meant to, just staring, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Eventually, I packed up, shaking my head. I didn't call anyone. I didn't write it down. I didn't even tell my neighbor, who occasionally fished with me. It was one of those things you file away in the back of your mind, unsure if it even happened. The next morning, I was at the dock early, cleaning my nets, when I noticed a black car parked at the far end. It wasn't just any car. The car was old, a 90s model sedan that seemed darker than usual, completely black with tinted windows. Two men stepped out, dressed identically in black suits, white shirts, and black ties with shoes that gleamed like they'd been polished that very morning. They walked directly toward me, not waving, not smiling. The air felt heavy as they approached, and I froze mid-motion while brushing some nets. The taller one spoke first, his voice calm and almost flat. "How many times have you seen the movement?" I blinked, unsure what he meant. "Movement?" I asked. He nodded sharply. "The movement under the water. How many times?" I was stunned. No one knew I'd seen anything, not neighbors, not friends, not anyone. And yet here they were, asking about something I hadn't discussed with a soul. "I don't understand," I said quietly. "What movement?" The shorter man stepped closer, his ash-grey eyes fixed on me steadily. "You know the pattern, the light. How many times?" I swallowed. "I only saw it once," I admitted, feeling uneasy even saying those words. A quick glance passed between them. So fast I almost missed it. Something unreadable passed between them. Confusion, disbelief, or something else entirely. They said nothing more, simply turning and walking back to their car with an unnatural precision that didn't seem quite human. I watched them get in, noticing they didn't fully open doors before sitting. The car made no sound, sliding into the gravel like part of the morning mist, then vanishing as if it had never existed. The rest of the day, I tried to shake off the encounter. I told myself I'd imagined it, that the tension of being alone had played tricks on my mind. But when I checked the dock later, there were no footprints. The gravel remained undisturbed, no tire tracks visible. Everything was clean, untouched. That evening I returned to the dock. The water's surface was smooth, black, quiet, yet I felt watched, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I packed up early and walked back to my small cabin on the hill, scanning the tree line constantly. I saw no one, but kept looking, half expecting to catch a glimpse of a suit or a watcher's reflection. For nights afterward, shadows near the dock's edge seemed to watch me, a constant reminder of that strange, unexplained visit. I was late September, about 10 years ago, living in a small village outside of Inverness in Aberdeen. The area was quiet, surrounded by farmland, with maybe 2 shops and a pub. Nights were dark in a way they rarely are now. No street lights passed the main road, and on clear nights, stars stretched uninterrupted across the sky. It was just after 11 when I was walking home from a friend's house. The early autumn air had a sharp bite, and fields were heavy with the smell of cut silage. I kept my torch low, watching the dirt path to avoid tripping on ruts. When I finally looked up, something caught my eye. Above the tree line, a shape was blocking part of the stars. At first I thought it was a cloud, but it was too precise. 3 straight edges forming a perfect triangle. I stopped walking and just stood there. The object moved slowly, silently, gliding without a sound. No engine noise, not even the rustle of branches you might hear from a low-flying plane. 3 white lights, steady and unblinking, outlined the edges. It passed directly overhead in about 20 seconds before continuing toward the hills and blending back into the darkness. I didn't run home, but I felt frozen, my body unsure how to react. Afterward, 2 men approached me about the incident. They asked about the movement with a precise, methodical manner, exchanging looks that suggested they were checking against some hidden record. Whenever I glimpse that part of the loch now, something feels different, quieter, heavier, as if holding its breath. I still fish the area, but not near that dock. I haven't told anyone what happened. There's no proof, just the memory of two men who knew something I never said, who disappeared like they were never real. Some nights when the wind is right and the loch is dark, I imagine them walking up the hill toward my cabin again. Part of me wants to see if they'll return for answers, but another part knows I don't want to find out. So I stay quiet, watching the loch from the hill's edge, letting memories sit as still as the water I'll never fish near again. I've been keeping what I saw to myself, not even telling my wife. The encounter seemed too strange, too unreal to share. That morning was bright, the streets still damp from earlier rain. The sky washed clean after the downpour. Walking down the lane near the old church, I was halfway along when a man suddenly appeared, stepping out from around the brow corner. He was tall, wearing a black suit, white shirt, and thin black tie, something you rarely see in our village outside of Sunday service or a funeral. He stopped directly in my path, his appearance striking. His skin was pale, eyes dark, and his face held an unsettling stillness. No twitching, no blinking, none of the small movements people typically make when standing still. "Did the craft rotate?" he asked in a calm but peculiar voice. I didn't understand right away. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone what I'd seen, hadn't even used the word craft in my own thoughts. When I asked him to explain, he repeated the question exactly. Did the craft rotate? I responded that it hadn't, it had simply glided flat. The moment I spoke, I realized I'd revealed too much. Confirming I'd actually witnessed something, he nodded once, as if I'd verified something for him, then without another word, turned and walked away down the narrow street by the church. Bewildered, I waited a few seconds and then followed, feeling the encounter was too bizarre to let go without understanding. But when I turned the corner, the lane was completely empty. I walked to the end, emerging into a field with no possible hiding spots, no open gates, no cars, nowhere he could have vanished so quickly. Standing there, I scanned the hedges and listened for footsteps. Nothing. Just crows on the telephone wires and the smell of wet earth. That night, I tried explaining it away. Perhaps he was just passing through. Maybe it was a coincidence. But the exact phrase, "Did the craft rotate?" kept echoing in my mind. I hadn't fully considered what I saw as a craft until he said those words. Over the next week, small things began to unsettle me. My normally calm dog barked at the back garden gate 3 consecutive nights, always around 2 a.m. each time I went to look. The lane was empty. Once, I thought I glimpsed a dark car, black or grey, idling at the field's edge near our house, its lights off. Now, my memory keeps coming back to that night, and the stranger who asked about rotation like it was the most important thing in the world. I still can't explain exactly what I saw. Laura and I had gone camping at Loch 80 for a weekend, wanting to test out her new gear before autumn arrived. Late August brought warm days but cold nights that demanded a good sleeping bag. We found a secluded spot off a forestry track on the north side, a flat piece of ground near the water with a clear view across the loch. Only a distant farmhouse with faint lights broke the wilderness, and no other campers were around. The silence was complete, the kind where you hear every water ripple and branch movement. After dinner, we sat by the water's edge, just listening. Around 11, when darkness had fully settled, Laura spotted something first. What we saw defied explanation. Initially, she thought it was a star reflection, but then it moved, slowly, deliberately. A pale yellow sphere, lantern-sized, hovered about 100 feet above the water's surface. More appeared, first one, then another, then a third. They maintained perfect spacing and didn't behave like typical lights. No blinking like aircraft, no beam casting like torches. They simply glowed with a strange pulsing quality that made the water beneath them shimmer. We sat frozen, watching. The spheres drifted silently across the loch. At one point, they lowered closer to the surface, creating a perfect mirror image. 3 spheres above, 3 reflected below, moving in unison. After perhaps 15 minutes, they rose higher, faded, and vanished without trail or sound. That night, I listened harder than ever before, half expecting something to approach through the trees, but only occasional fish splashes and wind through. Heather broke the silence. The next morning, while unzipping the tent, I noticed two men standing nearby. They wore dark suits, black ties, and white shirts, clothing that seemed bizarrely out of place. Their attire was creased but dry, as if they hadn't traveled through the surrounding terrain. I never saw that strangely dressed man again. He didn't return to the village, and no one else mentioned noticing such a stranger. They walked up silently without introducing themselves. The taller man with short, dark hair asked us about a hum. I went completely still. We hadn't told anyone about what we'd seen, not even Laura's brother, who knew our camping location. Laura woke up behind me, rubbing her eyes and asking what he meant. The second man, with lighter hair and no expression, repeated the question about the hum. We denied hearing anything. They exchanged a quick glance, seemingly confirming something between themselves. Then the tall one simply said, "Thank you," and they walked back up the forestry track without another word. We sat stunned. I didn't think to follow them until they had disappeared. When I finally went up the track, it was empty. No car sounds, no footprints, nothing. Later that day, Laura noticed something odd. The sheep in the nearby field were all crowded on one side, pressed tight against the fence, as if trying to get as far away as possible. During our drive home, we tried to discuss the encounter but felt strange, like speaking too much might make things worse. What stuck in my mind was how certain they were that we'd heard something humming. We never camped there again. Our evening had started normally. Marissa and I had driven out to her sister's place in Oak Ridge for dinner, leaving just after 9. The drive home was about 40 minutes through dark back roads, lined with trees and occasional pastures. It was early October, with a cool, crisp air and an unusually clear sky. Midway home, near some farmland, Marissa spotted something first, hovering low above a row of trees. A couple 100 yards off the road was a cluster of lights. Initially, I thought it was a plane, but the pattern seemed wrong. These weren't blinking aircraft lights. They glowed steadily, 3 white and 1 red, arranged in a diamond shape. What struck me most was how unnaturally still they were. We slowed down and stopped on the shoulder for a better look. The object hung motionless and completely silent. It wasn't like a helicopter, no rotor sound, no air vibration. The lights shifted slowly, almost rotating before beginning to drift sideways, parallel to the road. We were sitting by the tree line, watching something for maybe 2 minutes. Then it suddenly rose up, unnaturally fast, and vanished into the sky without a sound. After that, we didn't speak much. Driving home felt strange. We kept glancing out the windows, as if expecting something to return. I couldn't stop trying to make sense of what we'd seen, but nothing about it felt ordinary. Our street looked normal when we turned onto it, but the moment our headlights swept across the front yard, we saw them. 2 men stood at our door, tall, thin, dressed in dark suits. Their skin looked pale, almost grey in the harsh light. They didn't turn when our car approached, which seemed off. Most people would. Instead, they remained motionless, facing our front door like they'd been waiting. Marissa grabbed my arm. "Who are they?" she whispered. I pulled into the driveway slowly, my mind struggling to process everything. We hadn't told anyone about what we'd just experienced. We hadn't even discussed it with each other. Yet somehow, these 2 men were already here. Before we could exit the car, both men turned in perfect sync and started walking toward us. Their movements were stiff but deliberate, as if mimicking human walking. I rolled down the window halfway. One leaned in, his eyes impossibly dark, his expression unchanging. In a flat, mechanical voice, he asked, "Did you see it land?" Marissa quietly answered, "No." The man stared at her, then straightened up. He glanced at his companion, who remained silent. Without another word, they turned and walked down the driveway, not hurried, not slow, just steady. I thought they might have a car nearby, but when they reached the street's edge, they didn't cross the road or head toward any vehicle. They simply continued walking side by side until darkness consumed them beyond the streetlight. We sat in the car for a long time, silent. When we left, I looked around, expecting to see them in the yard, but it was empty. That night, sleep was elusive. Every tiny sound outside made us alert and listening. Around 3 a.m., I got up and checked the locks again. Nothing was disturbed, but the air felt heavy, like we weren't alone. The next day, I asked neighbors about any suspicious activity. No one had seen anything. I even drove up and down the street, searching for any parked cars, but found nothing. What haunts me is the specificity of their question. It wasn't a casual inquiry, but a targeted confirmation. Did you see it land? Almost as if they knew exactly what we'd witnessed and just needed to verify the final details. Their departure, no car, no sound, no trace, still defies explanation. The ferry ride from St. George's was meant to be routine. It was late July, warm, with that cool Atlantic salt air, and the sky remained a pale blue as we left the dock. Earlier that evening, I'd been on the eastern cliffs filming gulls and waves with my phone. That's when I spotted the lights, low over the water, about half a mile offshore. Initially 3 of them, white with green tinge drifting together as if connected. I initially thought they might be helicopters, but there was no sound. As I watched, they shifted strangely, splitting apart and reforming into a triangle. I filmed until the image became grainy, and then suddenly, all lights vanished. I planned to review the footage later, but the ferry was departing soon. Boarding as usual, I handed my ticket to the deckhand and went to the back rail. About 20 passengers were aboard, a mix of commuters and tourists, all wearing that tired evening boat expression. Near the rear cabin window, 2 men caught my attention. They were identically dressed in dark suits, white shirts, and black ties, unusual attire for a summer ferry ride, where suits are typically reserved for weddings or funerals. Their hats sat neatly beside them. They weren't speaking to each other or anyone else, just sitting perfectly still. At first, I didn't think much of it, but something about them felt off. The ferry crossing felt different from the start. 2 passengers weren't behaving like anyone else. While others scrolled phones or shifted in their seats, these men just stared out at the ocean, completely still. I'd been near the gangway when they boarded, and the image of their empty window seats stuck with me. An hour into the trip, I went inside to use the restroom. Returning, I slowed near their table and got a closer look. They were identical in an unsettling way. Tall, pale, with dark hair combed perfectly back. Their skin looked unnaturally smooth, almost airbrushed. The shorter one had long, thin fingers folded motionlessly on the table. As I walked past, neither of them blinked. I sat a few rows behind, stealing glances throughout the crossing. Once, the taller one turned just enough for me to see his profile. His jaw barely moved, but I could have sworn his lips formed a silent word. His companion tilted his head slightly as if listening. Strangely, no one else seemed to notice them. A woman with 2 kids walked right by to get snacks, not even looking in their direction. When the ferry horn sounded near the dock, both men straightened simultaneously like soldiers coming to attention. After disembarking, I looked back. Their table was empty, their hats gone, pretending to tie my shoe on the pier. I watched other passengers, fishermen, teenagers, with bikes, couples, but saw no sign of those 2 men. When the last car drove off, I walked back and checked through the ferry windows. The booth remained empty. No one was on deck. I still have the grainy, shaky phone footage of the lights. I've watched it countless times trying to understand what I saw, but I can't shake the image of those 2 men suddenly appearing and disappearing, staring at the same ocean where strange lights had been. This happened late in autumn, when grey skies and a damp chill were constant. I was working my family's farm outside Stirlingshire, doing what I'd done since I could drive a tractor. Mostly sheep, some barley. It wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet, and it was mine. The first strange thing happened just after dusk on a Wednesday. At first I thought it was moonlight breaking through the clouds, but something was different. 3 distinct lights hung in a tight triangle above the field, shifting almost lazily while maintaining a perfect formation. No sound, no engine noise, just an eerie glow moving silently overhead. I watched for about 10 minutes frozen, until the lights suddenly rose in unison and shot upward, vanishing into the low clouds without a trace. That night, sleep was impossible. I kept turning the experience over in my mind, searching for a rational explanation. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was probably some military exercise. I called the nearby RF base and reported what I'd seen. The man who answered was polite, but seemed uninterested, simply noting the time and location before saying, "Thank you, sir," and ending the call. The next afternoon, around 3 o'clock, I was splitting wood in the yard when a black car came down the lane. It was an old model, polished but out of place on our muddy track. 2 men stepped out. tall, wearing dark suits and hats that looked too sharp and clean for our rural setting. They were unusual, pale beyond normal, almost as if they'd never seen sunlight. Their faces were smooth, almost waxy, and they blinked far less than seemed natural. The taller one spoke first, with an accent I couldn't place. "We'd like to see where you keep your sheep," he said, not as a request, but a statement. Something about their silent, waiting presence made me uneasy, but I didn't feel I could refuse. I led them across the yard, through the gate, toward the south paddock where most of the flock was grazing. They followed quietly, their shoes making almost no sound on the gravel. At the fence, the shorter man leaned on a post, staring intently at the sheep. The taller one turned to me and stated, "This is all of them." "Most," I answered, my voice small. They nodded simultaneously, a synchronized movement that made my stomach knot. Then, without another word, they turned and walked back to their car. And I was walking home from school that Tuesday in October, the kind of cold that doesn't bite but makes your skin feel tight. I missed the bus because my algebra test took longer than it should have, so I decided to walk the half-mile home. The street looked typical. Cars parked nose to curb, Mrs. Ortega's dog tied to the porch rail, kids' bikes leaning against steps. I had my headphones in for 20 seconds before taking them out. I'm weird about hearing the world when I walk alone. At first, it was just a light on the power lines near the old water tower, one bulb that thinks it's a spotlight. But the shape wasn't sitting on the pole. It hung in the air about 20 feet above the sidewalk, right past the library steps. A pale circle like a paper plate with a glow on it. No halo, no beam, just that soft, steady disc. I stopped. My hands were in my hoodie pockets. My breath made small clouds. The light didn't flicker. It didn't hum. The leaves above me didn't move when it slid a little to the left. I followed the street, and it followed me. When I crossed at the crosswalk, it crossed too, keeping the same distance, as if paired with me like a shadow. I know that sounds dramatic, but that's what happened. A week earlier, something strange had occurred on the farm. Men had appeared near the fence, gripping the wood. By the time I caught up, they were already in the car. The engine started with a low purr, and they drove back up the lane without looking at me once. That evening, the sheep behaved oddly. Normally they'd crowd the south paddock until I guided them back toward the sheds. But that night, they refused to go near it. They bunched together by the gate, bleeding, stamping their hooves, refusing to move, no matter how much I coaxed. I herded them into the smaller east field instead. I figured it was just animals being unpredictable, but it kept happening. Every night after, they avoided the south paddock like there was something wrong with it. Even during the day, they stayed away, huddled at the far edge if they wandered in at all. A week later, I walked to the field myself, trying to spot anything out of place. The grass looked normal. No scorch marks, no broken fences, just the same pasture I'd tended for years. But standing there, I felt a strange heaviness, like the air itself was pressing down. I can't explain it better than that. Since then, I haven't seen the men again. Haven't seen the lights either. But the sheep still won't settle in that field. It's as if they know something's there that I don't. Nye walked past the sidewalk near Mr. Presser, near Mr. Dell, Levin's garage, and the light was different. It drifted closer, like some weird drone, stopping right above me. I didn't look back much, just kept moving. A kid named TJ from my homeroom didn't even glance up when I passed. The light seemed to move through fog, like something was guiding it. I thought about taking a picture, but my phone's camera was open to messy text messages. It wouldn't have shown anything anyway. When the cul-de-sac around my block hits the hill, my neighborhood opens to a line of trees and houses. Suddenly, the light shot ahead, not a burst, just a quick motion. I got this panicked feeling like when you're 10 and think you forgot to lock the shed. My dad would know. I jogged the rest of the way home and didn't look back until I was almost inside. Claire from across the street heard me and asked if I was okay. I said I was fine and closed the door. Inside, I locked it, flipped the porch light, and told my mom in the kitchen she was drying dishes and smiled that mom smile when kids say something weird but insist it's serious. "You got home safe?" she said. "Good." I didn't tell anyone the shape, I just said a light and left the rest out, because it sounded silly, like something from a movie. Mom didn't ask more. She had the oven on and a work call coming up. My brother called from college with some story about a friend catching a bus. The next morning, I went to school early to ask Mr. Tadeva Harov about the test. The front steps were wet from overnight fog. Two men stood by the flagpole, the kind you only see in movies about secrets. Dark suits, dark ties, shoes so polished they reflected the concrete. No badges, just waiting. One saw me and tilted his head like I was exactly what he expected. He walked over with the other man, stopping about 3 feet away. The taller one had a face that, at school. Two men approached me. They didn't look particularly remarkable. One with a small cheek scar, both faintly smelling of hospital lemon cleaner. My brain defaulted to a polite, "Can I help you?" reflex. The taller man asked about a sphere following me the previous night. I repeated sphere because I'd only mentioned a light before. My tongue felt thick. People always said to be honest, but something about that moment made honesty feel risky. The shorter man watched me intently without writing anything down. His attention was a strange mix of bored and alert, making my skin prickle. He wanted details. Describe its motion, color, any electronic interference. I could have lied or walked away, but curiosity kept me talking. I described how it followed me from the library, pale with a bluish tint, moving slowly before quickly sliding to the curb. My phone had gone fuzzy when I tried to photograph it. I didn't mention my racing thoughts or the underlying anxiety. They exchanged a knowing glance, seemingly sharing unspoken understanding. The taller one instructed me to continue my routine, avoid discussing the observation, and report any physiological symptoms. When I asked who to report to, he vaguely suggested the school nurse or police, and added cryptically to maintain distance. If it happened again, they left as quietly as they arrived. No one at school seemed to notice. The janitor continued sweeping. Miss Patel buzzed through her usual morning routine. Their interaction felt like an invisible errand in plain sight. I spent the day maintaining normalcy, answering questions, taking notes, returning worksheets, and I watched everything more carefully. Hallway lights seemed different, fluorescent hums more pronounced. At lunch, TJ asked about a traffic accident, and I kept my observations to myself. Nat, here's the rewritten version. Something felt off after the translator error in the feed. By the time the bell rang, my head was buzzing with scattered thoughts. That night, sleep eluded me. I wandered to the corner, hands tucked in my pockets, staring up at the darkened sky. Wet asphalt and grilled meat hung in the air. No lights, no disturbance. Gus, Mrs. Ortega's dog, trotted by with his owner, giving me a look that suggested I should be indoors after dark. I returned home, leaving the porch light on. Small background noises started feeling significant in the days following their visit. My phone's alarm blinked oddly, correcting itself a minute early. The school security camera facing the parking lot captured a strange morning, recording normally, then suddenly showing 2 frames of pure static before resuming. My friend Maya claimed I hadn't told Mr. Harov about the test despite me explicitly mentioning it 3 times that morning. Facts seemed to be sliding around me, losing their grip on reality. A week later, on a rainy Thursday, I was summoned to the office, expecting trouble for something trivial. I was surprised to find the 2 men seated in folding chairs again. The taller one wore the same thin smile. The principal assured me they just wanted to check on my well-being, asking about headaches, sleep issues, dizziness. I mentioned feeling tired and jumpy. I kept silent about the night I'd gone out, watching my hands tremble while reaching for a pen. They didn't request my phone photos or ask about my walking route. A brief nod, and they were gone. Following their visit, I tried maintaining normalcy. Errands for Mum, homework, soccer practice. Everything seemed routine, yet the incident kept flickering through my thoughts. On the 3rd night, I woke to a car door sound and an unsettling sense of being watched. The porch light was on, but nobody was there when I checked. The next morning's silence felt eerily empty, as if someone had stolen away the morning bird chorus. I never saw those men again. Not in person. Twice, though, I spotted a black sedan. The end of August was hot, even after dark, with cicadas still buzzing. As a freelance photographer, I'd been shooting barns for a client earlier that day. Driving back along County Road 14, I pulled my car onto the gravel shoulder near a cornfield. The stalks towered above me, thick and dark in the humid air. Low over the field, I noticed odd lights, 3 at first, white but soft, almost like drifting lanterns. They weren't moving like typical aircraft. Instead, they hovered, shifted slightly, then realigned. I parked and killed the headlights. The sky glowed a dull orange from distant town lights, with a few stars peeking through. I set up my camera on the hood and started taking shots at different exposures. Through the viewfinder, the lights looked sharper, almost brighter than to my naked eye. I captured maybe a dozen photos. At one point, the lights faded, then reappeared in a completely different position. The only sound was insects chirping. In the distance on the bypass, something stationary caught my eye where a driver wouldn't normally sit. I kept the details to myself, telling my brother only that I'd seen something weird. I didn't want to be made into a hero or labeled a liar. It's strange how ordinary things become linked to an event. I found myself checking my phone's camera when passing the library, not to get proof, but because the act made me feel safer. My hands would go to my pockets a little faster on walks home. Once, waiting at a crosswalk, the light by the tower blinked, triggering a small panic that quickly extinguished. Time moved on. Classes changed, seasons shifted. The light, whatever it was, hadn't followed me since that first night. Maybe it wanted something and got it. Maybe it wanted nothing at all. The men in suits never called, never sent a letter, never showed up again. The school continued its routine, the janitor swept, and my phone's camera still captured lousy sky photos. I tell this because sometimes the strange thing isn't the big mythic moment. Sometimes it's the tiny enrollment of details afterward. A question asked in a neutral tone by someone who seems to already know the answer. A blank frame on a security file. A neighbor's dog that doesn't bark like it used to. These details made me watch the sky longer than I should have. They're why I now lock the door twice each night, a habit I've kept. The faint buzz of power lines running along the road. Something felt off, but not threatening, just odd. The evening was strange and unsettling. 15 minutes passed, and suddenly the lights blinked out completely. After waiting a moment, I decided to head home. That's when they appeared. 2 men stood by the rear of my car near the trunk. Their appearance was precise and uniform, black suits, white shirts, black ties. The suits looked heavy, like winter funeral attire, but neither man seemed affected by the heat. They were tall. One towered over me by at least half a foot, the other only slightly shorter. Their black shoes remained immaculately clean despite the dusty gravel. I hadn't heard them approach. One moment I was adjusting my camera settings, the next they were simply there. "Evening, ma'am," the taller one said. His voice was low and controlled, barely audible in the open field. "We'd like to see the camera you used." I gripped the camera tightly and asked who they were. Didn't respond. The shorter man repeated the exact same line, word for word, as if reading from a script. Something about their delivery felt mechanical, no accent, no emotion. When I asked why, they stood silent for 5 full seconds, staring. Their faces were pale, but not sickly, unnaturally smooth, making their age impossible to determine. Dark hair was neatly parted and cut short, like an old photograph. The taller one's lips barely moved when he finally said, "To verify." I stepped back toward the driver's door. "I'm not giving you my camera." Simultaneously, they smiled. It wasn't a natural expression, more like a rehearsed imitation. The same small upturn at the corners, the same flash of perfectly even teeth. Then, without another word, they turned and walked down the road, away from me. No car, no flashlight, just black suits and pale faces dissolving into the humid darkness. Gravel crunched under their shoes briefly, then stopped. When I looked up, they had vanished. The road stretched long and empty, with nowhere to have disappeared. Shaking, I got in the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands trembled so much I dropped the camera on the passenger seat. Driving back toward town, the radio dissolved into static for about a mile. It was late November, the kind of quiet evening when darkness falls early and a cold drizzle soaks the landscape. My small one-story house sits on the edge of a farming town in upstate New York, where everyone knows each other's business. I work at the local feed store. Nothing exciting, just a typical job. 2 nights before, I was stacking wood behind the house when something unusual caught my eye. A set of 3 dull orange lights moved slowly in a triangle formation, completely silent. They hung overhead for a few seconds before shooting east faster than anything I'd ever seen. I told no one, not my neighbors, not my co-workers. I didn't even take out my phone. That Friday night, I was watching TV with my dog at my feet when 3 steady knocks interrupted the quiet. No quick rap, but deliberate, measured knocks. Out here, nobody drops by without calling first. When I opened the door, a tall, pale man in a black suit stood on my porch. White shirt, black tie, polished dress shoes that seemed too formal for a muddy farm road. He didn't smile or introduce himself. Later, I returned to normal. The dash clock flickered and settled back to the correct time. I kept checking the rearview mirror, but saw only empty road. At home, I loaded the photos onto my laptop. The first few were ordinary, dim cornfield shapes and faint glows where lights had been. Halfway through the sequence, something changed. One shot showed 2 men in the cornfield between the rows, facing the camera. Blurry but unmistakable. Black suits standing amid the stalks. I hadn't seen anyone while shooting. No movement, no rustling leaves. The next shot showed only empty corn rows. Days later, at the grocery store, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Just a photo, the same cornfield shot, now zoomed in on their faces. No message, no caption. When I got home, the camera battery was dead, though it had been full before. The memory card was missing, and I knew I hadn't removed it. I've replaced my locks since then. I still go out on shoots, but never alone and never near that cornfield. He arrived with no greeting, no badge, just a low, flat voice asking to come inside and ask a few questions. I told him I was busy, but he spoke with unsettling precision. We're gathering information on aerial phenomena observed from this property on the evening of November 23rd at approximately 6:37 p.m. The specificity stopped me cold. I hadn't told anyone about what I'd seen, hadn't even written it down, and I asked how he knew. He simply repeated, "We're gathering information." His appearance was off-putting. His skin looked grey like old paper, lips thin and colourless. His eyes were so dark that pupils and irises blended together, and he didn't blink, not once. Standing on my drizzle-covered porch with the overhead light buzzing, he stared intently. I didn't want him inside, so I insisted he ask his questions right there, and his questions were eerily precise. Describe the number and arrangement of lights observed. Describe the direction of travel relative to true north. Describe any changes in sound level or electromagnetic interference. He said electromagnetic interference as if reading from a script. I gave short answers, hoping he'd leave. 3 lights moving east, silent, nothing else. At this, he tilted his head slightly, almost bird-like, and stared with the strangest, most intense gaze I'd ever experienced. It was completely blank, yet waiting, as if expecting me to correct myself. "Have you shared this observation with any person or agency?" he asked. "No," I answered. He slipped his untouched notepad back into his jacket and said, "We thank you for your cooperation. No name, no eye contact, just we." He turned and stepped off the porch. I closed the door, heart racing. The entire interaction lasted maybe 3 minutes. In the living room, with my dog still by my chair, I tried to calm down. Seconds later, I thought I should check where he went, maybe get a license plate. I opened the door again. The porch was empty. The gravel driveway was empty. No car, no footprints in the wet dirt. The drizzle continued. I was driving home on Route 9, the stretch that runs past Miller's Farm, the one with the broken fence and that squat red barn. It was late, maybe 10:30, and the rain had backed off to a steady mist that made the foul road glisten. I'd been looking at the GPS and thinking about nothing in particular when a pale light appeared over the field to my right, just above the stalks. At first I thought someone had left a tractor light on, but it hung there motionless. No beam sweep, just a soft white glow like a porch lantern floating 10 or 12 feet off the ground. I did what most people do. I slowed and then stopped on the shoulder, hazard flashes blinking in the drizzle. The car went quiet, except for the wipers. The light stayed where it was, steady. I didn't pulse. I didn't make a sound. Later that night, I realized something was off. I walked out to the road after hearing my dog whine softly, something he almost never does. It strayed for about a quarter mile in both directions. With the drizzle and my porch light behind me, I should have been able to see a tail light, or at least a dark shape moving away. Nothing, just the sound of rain on the leaves. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat down. My hands were shaking. An hour later, while making tea, I noticed something strange. When he'd been standing on the porch, I never heard the rain on his coat. I should have been dripping. Mine was soaked after a minute outside. He didn't have an umbrella, no beads of water on his shoulders. His shoes, polished leather, had been spotless. The next morning, I checked my security camera. It's an old motion-activated thing over the garage. It records in short clips whenever someone comes up to drive. There was nothing from that night. No car pulling in, no person walking up, no one leaving, just the normal empty driveway. I thought about telling someone, but what would I even say? That some guy in a suit knew the exact time I saw 3 lights in the sky and then disappeared into thin air. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a single piece of plain white paper with the words, "Thank you for your cooperation," typed in the same flat, precise way he'd spoken. I didn't keep the letter. I burned it. Since then, I haven't seen any strange lights. But at night, if a car slows down near my place, I find myself turning off the lights and waiting until it passes. Now, a strange light caught my attention out in the field, something that looked almost like farm equipment at first glance. But there was nothing around to explain it, no vehicle, no wires, nothing connecting the glow to anything on Earth. Then it moved, not like any aircraft I'd seen before, just a sideways slide of about 30 yards. Then a complete stop. That's when I noticed the radio. Static crept in, first a faint buzz, then total white noise drowning out my station. The dashboard clock blinked to 0 momentarily before resetting. What else could I do but take pictures? My phone captured nothing, just blurry smears where light should have been. Phone cameras never really catch these weird moments clearly. When the light suddenly vanished, I drove on with shaky hands. The field looked ordinary under my headlights, but something felt off. The road was empty in a way that made my skin crawl. No trucks, no other cars, no movement at all. The world had shrunk down to something tight and unsettling. Days later, a black sedan appeared near my house. Always parked 2 houses down, perfectly maintained without a single mark. Sometimes the driver's seat was empty, sometimes a shadow occupied the passenger side. I watched it closely. One afternoon, I saw it pull away, not rushing, just smoothly turning the corner. When I followed it behind a delivery truck, I noticed it never exceeded the speed limit. By the 3rd day, the car's consistent presence felt deliberate. Its positioning was always the same, always with a cold engine. I couldn't shake the feeling something was watching, waiting. Just another ordinary-looking sedan that didn't quite feel ordinary at all. I knew something was off before I recognized why. It started at the diner on Pine Street, a place I'd visited before, the kind of spot that keeps coffee hot all night and displays pie on the board even at 2 a.m. after grabbing a hash brown. I noticed the black car had crept closer, idling by the pump. Its tinted windows were so dark you couldn't see inside. For 2 days, the car kept appearing in strange locations. At the grocery near the library, in the church parking lot, always somewhere it didn't belong. Each time I spotted it, a tightness would pinch between my shoulder blades. I mentioned my suspicions to a work friend who'd previously joked about the local UFO guy. His response was a laugh that never reached his eyes. "Call the police if you..." I didn't call. That Friday night, unable to sit alone in my dark apartment, I went to the diner. Inside, the fluorescent lights blazed too brightly. An old man ate beans at the counter, while Ellie, the waitress who recognized me, brought coffee without asking. I took the window booth, watching the parking lot. The black car was there, parked just beyond the street lamp's reach, as expected. I was halfway through my sandwich when the door chimed. 2 men entered wearing identical black suits, not just dark jackets, but vintage-cut suits that seemed tailored decades ago. Crisp white shirts, dark ties, polished shoes. They moved with calculated precision, each step purposeful. One had ash-colored hair, neatly combed back. The other bore a slight smirk, suggesting he enjoyed saying uncomfortable things. Both carried the composed demeanor city professionals develop after long workdays. They approached my booth directly. "Are you feeling well since the event?" the taller one asked, flatly. For a moment, I thought he was joking. "What event?" I responded, feigning ignorance. I'd told no one about the lights, not even Ellie. The taller man's eyes remained unnervingly calm. His companion blinked, but even that seemed calculated. They stood there, perfectly mirrored, their faces nearly identical, a faint hint of aftershave and rain clinging to them. The diner's air grew colder with their presence. I laughed. That nervous reflex when uncertainty grips you. When they mentioned Miller's Field, I stayed silent. Saying anything would make the moment too real. The taller man spoke in precise, mechanical tones. Continue your routine. Avoid sharing details. We will monitor. My voice felt foreign when I asked, "What do you mean, monitor?" The diner had gone completely quiet. The old man's fork hung suspended mid-air. Ellie stared down at the register, her order pad forgotten. The shorter man pressed a finger on the table, like marking an invisible surface. "We are checking for adverse effects," he stated. "You reported no auditory disturbances." They moved with impossible synchronization. Both tilted their heads at the exact same angle. The taller man's smile didn't reach his eyes, matched precisely by the shorter man's identical expression. "I haven't said anything," I said sharply. "Good," they responded in unison. The taller one added, "Keep your schedule. Maintain social contacts. Do not conduct experiments." The words hung heavy in the air. As a courier, I couldn't imagine what experiments they meant. Around us, the diner's occupants froze. The old man lowered his fork. A woman by the pie case turned pale. A young cook in a baseball cap focused intently on flipping eggs, as if concentration could make these strange men disappear. For 2 minutes, they stood there. Then, with the same economical pace, they turned and walked to the door. Through rain-streaked windows, I saw their black car, headlights off, tinted glass obscuring its interior. In just a few strides, they reached the vehicle, the taller one opening the door, and then they were gone. And I've been tracking their movements since that night at the diner. 2 men in a black car, silent and precise. No aggression, just a methodical presence like closing an administrative file. The encounter started simply enough. They pulled up, slid into the car, and drove slowly down the street. Nothing dramatic. Their approach felt calculated, almost bureaucratic. Later, at the diner, a waitress asked about pie with an overly cheerful voice. I left a $10 bill and walked out, unfinished coffee behind me. Outside, rain fell steadily. Walking home under streetlights, I replayed their cryptic conversation. No new insights emerged, just clipped phrases and a strange instruction to keep quiet. That night, every light in my apartment blazed. I watched the door, anticipating something. A soft knock, tire sounds. Nothing came. The water by my bed tasted metallic. Sleep became fragmented. My internal clock altered. I woke earlier than usual, feeling like I was waiting for an unauthorized medical exam. The black car appeared less frequently afterward, but when it did, a visceral dread settled in my stomach. Once I spotted them at the gas station, reflections of pale faces and black suits moving past. They didn't approach. They didn't need to. I told only Aaron, an obituary writer who treats everything as potential comedy. He suggested ignoring the incident. Ironically, his lack of detailed questioning made me share more. The next day, he recommended documenting everything. So, I did. My notebook sits on the kitchen table, pages filled with meticulous details. Times. Descriptions. The car. The rain. The diner's coffee smell. I kept driving past. Miller's Field. Parking on the shoulder, hoping to see that strange light again. Seeking proof. Wanting to distill this experience into one comprehensible narrative. Daylight reveals nothing unusual. Just cornrows, a broken fence I've always meant to report. But at dusk, an inexplicable glow lingers on the horizon, something my camera can't capture. Now, I lock my front door twice. I check the peephole repeatedly. Something fundamental has shifted, and I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. And I go to work at Anchor and Elm, a little coffee shop where I serve early morning regulars before the sun is fully up. My world has gotten smaller lately. The curtains barely block my view of the street, and I'm always scanning for that black car. I finish my deliveries and sometimes sit alone in the diner, eating a late sandwich. Nobody really asks about my health anymore. Last night, I was on the harbour road with the tide low when something caught my eye. 3 lights hung over the water, moving slow and deliberate, like they were pacing something below. They weren't as bright as a plane. I pulled over, climbed onto the break wall, and took some pictures with my phone. On the screen they looked cleaner, 3 white dots forming a crooked triangle, sometimes wobbling, sometimes steady. Around midnight I posted the photo in the town's Facebook group with a simple line, Weird lights over the bay. Anyone else seeing this? I didn't expect much. Most posts were about crab recipes or lost dogs. I fell asleep with the window cracked open, listening to distant gulls and the harbour's hum. The next morning was like any other Tuesday. Foggy grey light made the lamps look like moons. I clocked in, wiped the steam wand, flipped the sign. The post had 2 comments. One about selling a boat, another just saying, "Wow, nothing urgent." An older man in a wool coat took the corner table, reading the paper. More people came in. Then, a little after 9, when the morning rush settled into a steady hum, I looked up and saw them. 2 men in black suits, the kind you see in movies about government things. No badges, no name tags. They didn't walk like tourists or townsmen. Their movements were purposeful, heels set, shoulders fixed. They stopped exactly at the service counter where I was pouring coffee and stacking muffins. They just stood there. No order, no small talk. The men didn't need to threaten me. When they asked if I was feeling well, there was no warmth. It was just a procedure to be completed, then closed like a file in a cabinet pushed shut with the same measured force every time. Their clean suits and short hair didn't raise any immediate suspicions. The taller one had a fade, the shorter one with a narrow jaw, but something felt off. They stood motionless at the counter, staring directly at me without blinking, not even once. Initially, I thought they were just intensely focused on the pastry cake. Then the taller one tilted his head slightly, his eyes tracking me like a predator monitoring prey. He wasn't chewing, he wasn't breathing heavily, he simply existed. They remained frozen for about 15 minutes. Despite the busy cafe, the atmosphere felt strangely muted. Customers would glance over, then return to their coffees as if nothing unusual was happening. I continued working, making sandwiches, taking payments, while these 2 men stood like carefully positioned statues. Regulars seemed oddly unperturbed. Pete, who always orders his sausage and egg at 9:30, would look up and smile as if everything was normal. A woman with a stroller sat nearby, scrolled through her phone, then left without acknowledging the strange presence. Something held me back from approaching them. I convinced myself it was just exhaustion and social awkwardness. Eventually I managed to ask, "Can I help you fellas with anything?" The shorter one barely turned his head. No real movement, no sound emerged from his mouth. The taller one gave a minimal nod, as if that answered everything. My voice felt small in the heavy silence. They carried themselves with an aura of absolute authority. Shoulders slightly forward, chin set, the posture of men accustomed to being obeyed. I felt like I was under intense scrutiny. As I returned to the espresso machine, they remained a constant presence. Each time I glanced over, they were in subtly different positions. Always precise, always calculated. Like actors who had rehearsed every minute gesture. When the rush finally subsided and I went to wipe the counter, they were still there. At least 15 minutes had passed, and nothing had changed. Nothing had changed. 9 appeared in the diner, both holding folded newspapers. They stood motionless until the taller one looked at my name tag and spoke. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice flat and measured like a recorded message. The question felt heavy, coming from someone who'd been watching me without blinking. I responded, "Yes, everything was fine," then wondered why I was even talking to them. The shorter man immediately asked about my recent experiences. "Have you slept since the event?" Any headaches, ringing in the ears, disrupted appetite. Those words made the coffee in my hand feel bright and acidic. I hadn't told anyone about what I'd seen, not my mother, my boss, or even the online group where I'd half-joked about the lights. I'd only posted a few pictures taken over the bay last night, with a small, "wow" response. My explanation didn't feel like a confession, but it somehow did. They listened without expression. The taller man instructed, "Continue routine. Avoid sharing details. If any symptoms worsen, consult your physician." He placed a folded paper on the counter between us, bearing only a small embossed barcode-like rectangle. At that moment, the diner fell silent. Someone dropped a tray in the back, creating a brief sound before everything went quiet. The 2 men straightened as if signaling it was time to leave. They walked out smoothly through the bell and into the fog without touching the door or drawing attention. What unsettled me most was what happened afterward. The man in the hat reading at the corner table claimed he hadn't seen the two men. Ellie at the register had no recollection of them, despite being right there. Pete said he'd been on his phone. The woman with the stroller seemed to have no memory of standing nearby. When I pressed for details, people looked at me with that blank, puzzled expression reserved for someone who seems overtired. Something didn't add up, but no one else seemed to notice. Noticed? A fog seemed to cover everything. I'd taken photos at the cafe that morning, and the wall cameras showed typical scenes. People with closed mouths, moving through their usual routines. But something felt off. Two men near the counter didn't appear in any footage. Someone from the local Facebook group messaged me privately after seeing my picture, asking if I was okay. By noon, Harbour Patrol was investigating reports about strange lights. I texted back that everything at the cafe was fine, trying to focus on making sandwiches. When I showed my roommate the pictures later, my favorite shot revealed something unexpected. 3 lights hung clear over the water, but in the background, barely visible, stood 2 shapes near the shoreline. Black-dressed figures as straight as telephone poles. Initially, I thought it was a light trick. Zooming in confirmed their presence. A taller figure with hands forward, a shorter one with a tilted head. They were exactly where the men had stood that morning. I didn't post that particular photo or mention the card left on the counter. Ellie, who'd worked mornings for 6 years, suggested I might be more tired than I realized. "You've got a lot going on," she said gently. "Maybe you're just jumpy." I wanted to argue but knew it would prove nothing. I told her I was fine and stacked muffin cases until my arms ached. That night, I rode the late bus home under a low sky. The fog had lifted and the bay lights had vanished. My roommate's friends were loud and cheerful, but I couldn't settle. At 2 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom. The kitchen was dark and silent, except for my phone's sudden notification. A direct message from an unrecognizable user contained only the same photo I'd taken of the 3 lights. Its timestamp predated my original post. No username, no caption. I looked again at the little card they'd left, noticing a dull rectangle where ink had been pressed into the paper. It looked like nothing and everything simultaneously. In the following days, I expected something to happen. I kept waiting to be questioned, told to stop posting, or given a list of instructions. I drove past the harbour, watching the water and sky for anything unusual. Sometimes a black car would appear, adding to the growing sense of unease. Note at the marina, my phone sometimes glitched. The camera would freeze and show a still from earlier, like being stuck on yesterday. I looked twice, and something was gone. The cafe's security footage had a strange moment at 9:15, a 10-second stretch, where the video feed pixelated and returned without audio. The system logged it as a temporary fault, and after replacing the cable, nothing else happened. When I brought up the lights, people at the shop changed the subject and joked about Maya's late-night lighthouse spotting. Later that week, I checked the Facebook thread. The original post had been taken down, and a moderator sent a private note saying, "Sometimes posts get flagged and removed." No one else remembered seeing the 2 women in the shop. Wall camera footage showed normal activity, people moving, talking, steaming milk. The supposed tableau of 2 women in black didn't appear except in my photo. I went home each night and locked the door, sleeping with the light on because it felt reasonable. The 2 women didn't return. Lights over the bay were reported here and there for a couple weeks. Then nobody talked about them anymore. My photo remained in my camera roll, a small piece of evidence that looked like a trick. I stopped posting to that group and told my roommate a toned-down version. Just a weird morning, that was all. Sometimes, while washing dishes, I'd find myself watching the street long after everyone had gone to bed. When fog rolled in off the water, I'd step outside, breathe the cold dampness, and check how the light hit the harbour. Nothing dramatic happened, no knock at the door, no late-night visits, just the regular world. My manager joked that maybe the city needed me as their official weather reporter. I laughed and went back to work, pouring coffee. Outwardly, nothing changed. I kept counting days and maintaining routines. Internally, something was different. I knew a shape the way you know a bruise. It wasn't obvious at first, but you can't unknow it. The 2 women had lingered by the counter, asked questions without really asking, then left, as if they'd never been there. I kept the photo on my phone. Every so often I open it and stare at the background until the image blurs, hoping some answer will step out of the grey. None has. Hot, and we had the kitchen window wide open, hoping for any hint of a breeze. Claire and I were living on my grandparents' place. 3 fields, an old red barn, and a windbreak of cottonwoods that was starting to sag. Nothing special. I was outside dealing with mosquitoes, lighting the last of the coils while Rex, our lab, sniffed around the back porch. That's when everything changed. The hen house went completely silent. At first, I thought maybe a fox was prowling, but then I realized every single bird had frozen solid, like someone had hit pause on a remote. Then a slow light began moving across the field. This wasn't a typical night scene. No airplane strobes, just a pale disk hovering low, about telephone pole height when you looked against the cottonwood trees. It drifted deliberately from the east hedgerow toward the pond, gliding without hurry and making absolutely no sound. The only evidence of its movement was a faint shift in the grass, a cool glow sliding past like a painter's torch. I grabbed my phone and snapped photos, but they were useless. Just washed out dots against black. Claire came out in her slippers, leaning her forehead on my shoulder and muttering, "What the hell?" as if I might have some explanation. Rex sat by the fence, unusually calm, watching with that focused attention dogs get when something unusual catches their eye. We watched it drift past the pond, over the woodlot, and then vanish into darkness, like someone had simply plucked a light from the sky and tucked it away. We didn't call anyone. Who would believe us? The sheriff would probably laugh us off. The next morning, strange things started happening. My pickup's battery was dead, though I'd left no lights on. The radio had a split second of static at noon, which was odd given our usually perfect reception. Claire's watch mysteriously lost 5 minutes, then found them. Again, an hour later, the hens refused to go near the east hedge, instead clustering tightly in a different part of the coop. Grandma Ellen, who's lived on this land for 50 years, just listened to our story and said nothing. The weather had been strange, still and humid, with odd things happening on farms. Claire mentioned dreaming of standing in a field and hearing voices in the grass, laughing it off over coffee while keeping her purse close at the table. I figured it was just a series of odd coincidences. When I checked the old game camera on the corner post by the pond, a clip made my stomach slide. The file was 6 seconds of black, then static, then 6 more seconds of black. No image at all. The timestamp read 2 a.m. The hens had gone quiet around 11 p.m. The light had gone over at maybe 11:13. These times weren't the same, but close enough to create patterns in my head. We talked about the light minimally, with Claire putting dishes away and pausing to rub her palms together the way she does when trying to stop thinking about something. "Maybe we should call somebody," she said, just to put it on record. I agreed we would the next day, feeling safer than acting immediately. He came the next evening, while it was still light. A soft, polite knock, the kind you'd expect from a neighbor returning a cup of sugar, surprised me. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door. The man stood on the porch in a dark suit that looked too new for the gravel drive. Clean shoes, neat coat, no hat. His hair was close-cropped, the color of river rock. He looked like someone who'd accidentally stepped out of a downtown office onto a farm. "Evening," he said, speaking without the usual small talk. "I apologize for the intrusion. May I have a glass of water before we discuss last night?" The words came out soft and flat, like someone reading from a card. He didn't wait for an offer, only had to say the words and the rest followed. Something was peculiar about the phrase, "before we discussed last night." He said it as if we were expected to have things to discuss, as if the visit wasn't a surprise. I glanced over my shoulder. Claire watched from the kitchen island. Grandma Ellen sat knitting in the rocker by the stove. The dog padded his feet on the floor and gave a single short bark. "I don't know," I started. "Who are you?" "We are conducting routine inquiries regarding observed aerial phenomena," he said. "A glass of water would be appreciated." By our law, he was the most ordinary refusal to be ordinary. The kind of person whose face doesn't reveal much, with eyes I couldn't quite place, not brown, not grey, unblinking as he spoke. I guessed he was probably with the county, someone who stops on farms for business, insurance, or zoning. The county fair was in town, so maybe he was passing through. I handed him a glass of water from the tap, which he took politely, his fingers wrapped around it in a way that suggested he'd done this 1,000 times before, but he didn't drink. When I realized he hadn't lifted the glass to his lips, I felt stupid. "You okay?" I asked. He set the glass on the porch rail and said, "Thank you. Now would you describe what you observed?" His voice was economical, each sentence a neat package, no notes taken, no phone out, no request for footage. He simply asked and waited. So I told him everything, about the pale disc hanging over the pond, sliding into the trees and disappearing. How the hens froze, Rex sat and watched, and the camera by the post captured only a blank clip at 02:12 a.m. Claire mentioned losing time on her watch. Grandma Ellen spoke of her dream. He nodded after each detail as if taking notes inside someone else's head. Once he leaned slightly and asked about auditory phenomena or headaches. I thought of Brent at the feed store talking about tinnitus and assured him, no ears ringing, nothing that would prompt a doctor. When I finished, he said, "We thank you for your cooperation." Without taking the glass or putting it in his pocket, he stood up, placed 2 small fingers on its rim, and walked off the porch. He passed through the next gate, turning toward the pond, moving between trees like someone finding a familiar corridor. Within 30 yards, the light through the leaves swallowed him, and he was gone. We stood there for a long time. Claire had dropped her dish towel. Grandma Ellen's knitting slid from her hands. Rex flattened his ears and gave a low whine. The glass sat untouched on the porch rail. Hours passed. The sun dipped, the corn shimmered, the crickets woke. Finally, with the sky dark and the porch light on, we remained, still wondering. Glass, and poured it down the sink. Nothing remained. Not a drop spilled, no trace of evaporation. The glass looked untouched, its rim dry and cool. When I ran my fingers inside, there was no hint of a waterline, no lingering scent of minerals. The surrounding landscape seemed undisturbed. Walking the path to the gate, the grass showed no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there to take a drink. At night, we sat with closed windows and the porch light on, and sleep was elusive. We knew farms, knew coyotes and storms, understood the small dangers that roam fields, but this felt different. Mornings brought more strange occurrences. The coop door would be shut when I'd left it open. My pickup's tailgate would be locked, despite being down. At noon, the shop radio would cut to 2 seconds of static across different stations. Grandma Ellen started leaving her porch light on until I asked her to stop, worried it was disturbing the hens and Rex's sleep. The suited man never returned. No car ever parked on the road that might match him or his demeanor. Eventually, I placed the glass in the cupboard with other dishes, trying to treat it like something ordinary. Yet sometimes, looking at that cupboard, I'd remember the hens frozen like statues, the quiet field with a single light moving like a hand across velvet, and how the man's tongue never moved when he spoke. I don't call this an event or a visitation. I'm not spinning tales about UFOs or hidden secrets. I share this story because people do that. They hold on to small, bright mysteries when the world offers them. He asked for water, left it on the porch, and by morning it was gone. We continued our chores. Seasons moved as they always do. The hens returned to pecking near the east hedge, and sometimes at night, I still glance at the pond. I was on the highway shoulder, engine running, when the first car passed, seemingly blind to my presence. It was near midnight, and the rain had turned soft, just enough to make highway lights smear across the slick pavement. I was returning from a job in the next county, traveling that long, lonely single lane. And a stretch of highway where the white line and occasional diner sign are your only companions suddenly became strange. My hands began to shake as something felt off with my headlights. They shifted from a normal dim yellow to a bright blue in an instant, as if someone had turned a knob. Other drivers seemed oblivious. They cut past me without slowing, taking their lanes as if nothing unusual was happening. Then, hovering over the tree line to the east, a light appeared. At first, it resembled a construction sign, the kind that glows above the road. But this was different. It hung stationary, about 100 feet above the guardrail, like a lamp someone had placed and abandoned. I pulled onto the shoulder and killed the engine, needing stillness. Rain hissed softly on the hood, while my phoneless signal left me disconnected. I didn't try to film. That always feels like admitting fear. Instead, I watched. For 5 minutes, I observed the scene. Cars passed beneath the light, close enough to flag down, yet no one stopped. Something strange was happening. The vehicles seemed to move around an invisible presence. This wasn't like any aircraft light, It was a clean, pale disc with a soft white and blue wash that defied description. Suddenly, the radio erupted into static, not a gradual fade, but an abrupt white roar as if disconnected from any recognizable source. The small digital thermometer flickered, dropping 2 degrees before returning to normal. These were the kind of small details you don't notice until you do. A truck passed 2 lanes over. The driver stared straight ahead, mouth moving, perhaps speaking to a passenger. He didn't slow down. The light then slid sideways, not sharply, but like an object being gently nudged across a table. I crossed over the median and stopped. The air felt different, not from wind or pressure, but as if someone had drawn an invisible curtain. I remember thinking about a pot of coffee left on a burner, how its aroma hangs in the air, just like this moment hung, suspended and unexplained. My quiet night on the highway had left me uneasy. The darkness felt heavy, punctuated by an inexplicable moment where something in the sky simply winked out, not fading, but vanishing instantly like a photograph torn away. No sound followed, no echo, just stillness. I drove home carefully, staying just below the speed limit. The desire to return to my own bed after such an odd experience felt perfectly normal. Turning off the main road, I entered my neighborhood's oldest strip with a 24-hour market and gas station. Sat, needing fuel and coffee, I pulled up to the pump. Marco, a kid who recognized me from a previous job, waved me toward pump 3. Inside the convenience store, diesel and peppermint gum scents mingled under harsh fluorescent lights. 2 men stood at the counter, distinctly out of place. Their dark suits and polished black shoes suggested downtown origins rather than a road trip. One was tall with a square, stone-carved jaw, the other slighter, with a thin nose and close-cropped beard. They stood motionless near the cooler, not buying anything. When the doorbell rang, they turned in perfect synchronization. Small details caught my eye. The taller man's slightly misaligned tie, a tiny scuff on the shorter man's right shoe. Their gaze fixed entirely on me. After my strange night, I felt like prey. "Hello," I blurted. A beat of silence followed. "Sir," the tall one spoke neutrally. "You were on Route 47 earlier this evening, were you not?" The statement, more than a question, unsettled me. I hadn't mentioned my route to anyone. "Yeah," I nodded. "Headed back from the mill." "Did you observe any aerial lights approximately 8 miles east of the bridge?" My throat tightened. "Yes," I said. They listened, not breathing. The shorter man studied his hands briefly, then looked up with an expression that made me examine his face. Twice. Not angry, not friendly, just puzzled. He demanded precision. Described the exact color of the lights. Not white or blue, but the specific color I remembered. It was an oddly specific request. I paused, reflecting on how challenging it can be to recall colors, especially from a nighttime experience. The light was pale, reminiscent of an overcast day, yet with a coolness that made its edges shift toward blue when I blinked. I described it exactly as soft white with a blue wash. More blue than halogen, but softer than neon, like the gentle blue you'd see in a pale winter window, clean but not electric. Their exchange was subtle, a quick movement, a tightening at the corner of the taller man's mouth, the shorter man tilting his head as if mishearing something. The moment lasted less than a second, but felt pivotal. The taller man's face went blank, and for the first time, he truly met my eyes. Confusion flickered across his features. "Excuse us," he said abruptly, causing Marco at the register to glance up. They appreciated my time, then stepped back, as if the conversation was over. They left exactly as they arrived, straight through the glass door, purchasing nothing, not even touching the pumps. They walked into the rain with purposeful determination. I watched them go, expecting them to enter a car, but no vehicle waited in the station lot. For a moment, I absurdly imagined they'd hidden behind a truck, yet no vehicle could conceal 2 grown men without making a sound. I paid for my coffee with cash. Marco didn't request a receipt. Outside, the rain intensified, streetlights blooming into halos. Fumbling my keys, I felt strangely disconnected, like emerging from a daydream beneath an old billboard. In my car, with the heater running and coffee's aroma lingering, I watched the station's edge. 10 minutes later, a black sedan rolled slowly past the pump islands, then eased down a side street. I watched, half expecting it to stop, but the car continued on. I turned onto the main road, swallowed by the rain and neon blur. The week after that night went back to normal on the surface. I worked, drove county roads, mowed the yard, but inside, something felt different. I started noticing small glitches more carefully. The oven clock would blink at 2:12 a.m. and correct itself. My phone would flash a temporary loss of carrier while on hold. The electrical hum in the house would take a soft carrier while on would-be skip. There were moments that caught me off guard. Once while making dinner, I realized I'd been standing in the kitchen for 6 minutes, staring out the window with no memory of what occupied my thoughts. These little interruptions made me watch the edges of my life more closely. I drove home with headlights low and the radio at a polite volume, not wanting the static to return. For 3 mornings after that night, I kept replaying the color question in my head. It seemed like an odd thing to ask. Researchers might want exit data or wavelengths, but a stranger asking about the shade of blue felt more like something a journalist would do, not anonymous men in suits at a gas station. When I told Marco the story during my next gas stop, he shrugged like the typical city kid. He remembered seeing a black, clean car pull through the lot that night but hadn't paid much attention. He wasn't sure about the 2 men at the counter, suggesting it might have been those suited guys getting coffee. A week later, I found something interesting. While walking to my car, I noticed a small folded paper on a pickup's bumper. It was a receipt from the gas station, printed at 11:43 p.m., matching the time of the encounter. On the back, someone had neatly written color, and underneath it, a single letter, B. I folded the paper into my pocket and drove home, contemplating who to tell. The county office? The local paper? A blog? But each time I tried to form the call, it felt like a small private matter, the kind of thing you might whisper over a fence. When I finally shared the story with my friend Cassia, a nurse, she simply said, "You were precise. Good. Keep it that way." Her professional tone suggested she wanted to advise, but said nothing more. What lingered wasn't really the men's question or their exchanged looks. Something else remained, undefined and subtle. The third night of a long weekend trip when the lights showed up over the lake. Clear Pond was our usual getaway spot, far from town. No cell service, just one rickety boat launch and a vault toilet that smelled like wet pine. The 5 of us, me, Alex, Maya, Brent, Lena, and Omar, had a couple of tents set up on the ridge above the water and a fire pit down by the shore. It had rained in the afternoon, then the clouds thinned enough to reveal that bright, hard summer sky that happens when humidity hangs low but the air is clearing. We'd eaten hot dogs, thrown a frisbee that kept getting blown off course, and then sat in a ring around the fire with our headlamp beams off, just listening. Around 11, when the bugs had gone quiet, and Brent was telling a story about a raccoon in his neighbor's trash, things felt smaller and slower than usual. You noticed the cadence of the night when you're not in a city. The frogs across the water had their own rhythm. A fire crackled. Then Maya, leaning back on her elbows with her face turned toward the lake, said, "Hey, do you see that?" At first, I thought she meant the moon, but the moon was where it always was, about 100 yards out over the pond. 3 pale lights hung maybe 20 feet above the surface. They moved together slowly, like someone had 3 lanterns on cables and was walking them across the water, except there was no boat, no rope, no sound. They drifted a little, paused, then slid sideways in perfect unison. Later, when I recalled that moment, I realized they were surprised in a way that had nothing to do with me being honest. They expected something else when I said the blue was a pale, clean winter blue. That brief confusion on their faces felt like a keyed mismatch. No threat, no alarm, but the same expression you get when a script you've recited 100 times breaks on the wrong page. They never came back. The station stayed open. Marco kept the coffee warm. The highway went on carrying its careless traffic. I can't say the world rearranged itself around my answer. The next time I drove past the routine, there was no light. Nothing but the constant white glare of the rain-slicked road. I kept the receipt folded in my glove compartment for a long time, then put it in the trash when I moved a box of maps and it fell out. The memory of that night hangs differently than other odd things. Less like a movie and more like a small missing tile in the floor you notice when you walk into the room. We were camping by Clear Pond, 5 of us gathered around the remnants of our campfire. The marshmallow sticks lay forgotten as I pulled out my phone to capture the scene. The camera struggled, turning the lights into blurry white dots, but the screen captured something, making the experience feel more tangible. Our group had different theories about what we'd seen. Bren suggested fishing lights from the far shore. Lena thought they might be drone hobbyists from nearby weekend campers, yet none of these explanations truly fit. The lights behaved differently. No LED flickering, no color changes, no blinking like typical navigation lights. What struck us most was how undisturbed the surrounding nature remained. Frogs continued their chorus. Ducks didn't scatter. The water stayed calm. After roughly 20 minutes, the lights simply dimmed, as if someone had slowly turned down a switch. We sat there, half expecting them to reappear. Conversation dwindled into hesitant, quiet exchanges. Exhausted, we retreated to our tents, going through our usual nighttime routine, brushing teeth, setting boat launch alarms, checking the cooler. Sleep came fitfully that night. Lena reported feeling like someone was walking near the tree line, but her headlamp revealed nothing when she checked. Brought lighter spirits. We joked about contacting the local newspaper with a mysterious light story, though what we really wanted was breakfast and coffee. While packing up, an unmarked dark sedan pulled into the drive just after sunrise. Its arrival felt peculiar. Who comes to observe campers at that hour? Two men in formal, well-tailored suits emerged. They walked deliberately, stopping near our campsite. "Morning," the taller man said in a flat, emotionless tone. No introductions, no small talk. Directly, he asked, "We were told you observed aerial lights over Clear Pond last night. Would you describe what you saw?" We exchanged glances, silently deciding who would speak. I described 3 lights moving together over the water, silent and synchronized. Omar added they hovered about 20 feet up before fading. Bren emphasized they didn't resemble flares. Each of us contributed our piece of an unexplained puzzle. The conversation felt oddly methodical from the start. 2 men stood with us, one shorter and the other taller, listening with an unnatural stillness. They didn't take notes or use phones. Instead, they watched our faces intently as we spoke, interrupting only to request pure observation without explanation. We complied, describing our experience with meticulous precision. We detailed the light's reflections on water, its color, temperature, and exact spacing. The taller man, seemingly never blinking, asked about potential electronic interference. Had our devices acted strangely? Each of us shared peculiar experiences. Bren mentioned a high-pitched ringing during the brightest moments. Lena's phone had unexpectedly powered off and on twice while attempting to photograph something. Maya's pocket compass had spun erratically before settling. I explained how our camera photos were useless, just smudged dots, and our video files appeared to have stuttered. The men listened, nodding at each detail. Remarkably, they never wrote anything down. When we pressed them about their identity, they responded with the same minimal smile. "We're conducting routine follow-up in the area." Their answers felt deliberate in their vagueness. Subtle oddities about them became increasingly apparent. Their skin seemed untouched by wind, and their dark, coffee-ground-colored eyes didn't seem to blink normally. Maya had quietly mentioned this to Omar, who acknowledged it but didn't want to vocalize the observation. Most surprisingly, instead of seizing our evidence or conducting an intense interrogation, they simply asked if anyone else knew about our observation. Had we shared on social media or contacted others? Lena and I confirmed minimal communication, just a single community page photo and a few casual mentions. 2 strangers appeared at our site. They were men in black suits, moving with an almost administrative precision. The taller one spoke first, his words measured and professional. "Appreciate your candor. Continue routine. Avoid sharing details beyond necessary contacts." When the coffee pot hissed in the ranger station, the shorter man asked plainly for everyone's names, not reaching for a notebook or phone, just waiting. One by one, we responded. Myself, Maya, Bren, Lena, Omar. Something felt off. I remember thinking I should request identification because this scenario felt like the start of something unsettling. When Brent nervously asked for their names, the shorter man tilted his head and stated simply, "Names are not necessary here." His response was courteous but final. Then they turned and walked toward the perimeter of our campsite. Their movement seemed normal at first, 2 men walking back into the woods, but instead of following our usual footpath, they stepped directly into the trees. The brush swallowed their sound completely. We watched as morning light gradually obscured their shapes. They moved straight among the tree trunks, as if walking down an invisible hallway. After they disappeared, Lena voiced what we were all thinking. Where'd they go? It was strange. There was no rustle of leaves, no disturbance. The light through the pines looked exactly the same as before they entered. We called the ranger, following the county's posted procedure, but he was out checking a damaged sign and didn't arrive for 40 minutes. When he finally came and we described the encounter, he nodded slowly, took our names, and made notes. Yet when he drove off to check the trail cameras, there was nothing to be found. Our camping trip started quietly enough. Just an empty grassy path, a stretch of trees, and no other vehicles at the camp entrance. The mud near the boat launch bore no marks except our own, and we packed up faster than planned. No one wanted to fish or swim after what happened. Bren talked about how thin the air felt, like you could hear your own breath too clearly. Maya was pale and laughed nervously at jokes that weren't funny. Lena kept rubbing her eyes, saying something about the man's coffee-colored eyes made her skin crawl. Omar drove in silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. We didn't stop until we passed the town signs and the highway drowned out the sound of our tires. Back home, I reviewed the photos. One picture I thought captured the lights best showed a thin grey line near the tree line where, for a split second, the taller man's shoulder was barely visible. Blown up, it was just grain and shadow. Nothing definitive. Maya's phone had a similar smudge, and Bren claimed his camera had corrupted the last 2 files. Lena insisted her compass had spun on its own for 15 minutes after we left the site. I wasn't sure what to make of any of it. I posted about the incident in the local group thread, using our real names to create a public record, not to start rumors. Some people said they'd seen lights on the road days earlier. Others suggested it was people with LED kites. One comment warned that people like us shouldn't camp alone. The next day, a woman who writes a bird-watching column asked to ask questions but never followed up. A ranger dropped by with a business card from the Division of Natural Lands, leaving it on the porch and mentioning he'd check with County Dispatch about any missing person reports. No agencies contacted us and local police never responded. The 2 men had asked polite, specific questions before walking into the trees and disappearing without a trace. We returned to our normal lives. Work, apartments, grocery stores, bus stops. We kept the photos feeling both hopeful and frustrated by their lack of clarity. Bren mentioned the incident twice at work, but his colleagues just shrugged it off. The day was hot, August's dusk hanging thick like a blanket, bugs making their steady shush through the leaves. I'd been hiking the Ridgeway Trail since childhood, knowing exactly when to put my phone away or take it out. Work had run late, and I was above the 3rd switchback when something appeared. At first it looked like a reflection, maybe sunlight dragging across the stream or someone with a poorly timed flashlight. But it was higher than the tree line, definitely not a reflection. Silver and massive, perhaps 20 to 30 feet across, flattened like a coin suspended on its edge. Its movement was slow and deliberate, without jerks or wings. No sound accompanied it. Birds continued flying past, undisturbed. The air remained unchanged. I switched on my camera, hand slightly shaky, aware I might later need to defend this wasn't a hallucination. The clip didn't capture much, just the usual grainy darkness, the silver object reduced to a smear. But when I replayed it, the motion looked peculiar. The object slid left, paused, then drifted behind the ridge line. I stayed put for a long time, sweating and thinking. That night, I didn't post the clip anywhere. I told myself I'd sleep on it, but sleep never came. The next day, I watched the footage on my laptop, knowing digital media can be untrustworthy. Cameras crop and compress, and phone cameras struggle in low light. Every so often, I open the folder with the photos. I zoom in on the smear in the recording, trying to steady it into a face. I tell myself not to make more of the day than there is. The men in suits were polite. They asked us to recount our observations without writing anything down. They said names weren't necessary. They walked into the woods and vanished. I drove home and called the ranger's card number once, leaving a message they never returned. Life returned to its small, tolerable routine. Coffee in the same mug, work shifts. The same guy at the bus stop reading a paper without looking up. But every time I think of those 2 men turning toward the pines and disappearing, I find myself checking the closed door twice before bed. I filmed it because I couldn't. This was a sighting that felt small and sensible in the moment, but too good to lose. Note my friend Ben, who runs the outdoor blog I write for, received a noisy file from me. Within 5 minutes, he responded with the kind of joke only close friends share, something about finding a mirror factory in the sky or having one too many trail beers. I'd been out hiking and the landscape was strange. The leaves in the foreground didn't rustle when I passed. Later that evening, sitting at the kitchen table with a clip-on loop, I noticed my wall clock slip a minute forward. I initially brushed it off as just a cheap clock's quirk. Then my bedside alarm phone blinked 2:13 a.m., even though I'd turned the alarm off. When I nudged it, the display corrected itself. These tiny occurrences made me notice my day differently. How I walked where light hit the windows, almost searching for seams. 2 nights after the hike, a black sedan first appeared outside my house. It was an older model but in near-perfect condition, parked under the street lamp on the curb across from my place. My narrow lane isn't typical for overnight parking unless someone's visiting. I checked my phone's corner clock. Exactly 2:13 a.m. The driver's area was dark, windows heavily tinted and headlights off. No engine noise disturbed the lane, which smelled of cut grass and warm asphalt. My dog Gus, usually sound asleep on the rug, got up and sat by the door. He wasn't barking, just staring, and something about his gaze felt like a warning. When the car finally left, it moved slowly and quietly, rolling away and disappearing at the first intersection, as if it had started its engine only when it wanted to be seen leaving. For a week, the sedan appeared under the street lamp with remarkable consistency, always at 2:13 a.m., always in the same spot. I tried catching someone getting out, even stepping into my backyard in shorts and flip-flops, calling out toward the lane. My voice sounded absurd against the silence. The car remained motionless. Once, I thought I glimpsed a silhouette in the passenger side, like someone leaning forward. But when I blinked, it was gone. A sedan would appear at exactly 2:13 a.m. Like clockwork. My neighbor, walking his dog early one morning, thought I looked tired when I asked about the car. He glanced over, and it seemed empty. So I started logging every detail. I set my old analog watch by the wall clock, obsessively measuring time. My methods got increasingly elaborate. A cheap motion camera went up on the porch. I left hallway lights on with blinds open. Some nights I'd sit in my car, engine running, radio low. Each night brought new doubts. Maybe it was a co-worker's friend. Maybe someone watching for car thieves. The human brain loves finding patterns. Ben kept asking for video footage, wanting to run it through filters to enhance the image. I was reluctant. This felt like private proof. Something to hold on to in case I needed to convince someone. I made copies, sliding one into an SD card hidden in my drawer. The car continued its nightly ritual, precise as ever. I slept with lights on, increasingly unsettled. On the 8th night, everything changed. The car stayed until 3:01 a.m., a deviation from its pattern. Then at 3:02, it turned down the block and stopped right across from my house. I couldn't take it anymore. With keys and flashlight, I went out. Gus, my dog, followed but stopped at the doorway. He's not confrontational. The car's windows were black. Its license plate looked ordinary, but when I shined my light, the digits blurred into shapeless forms. I felt exposed, foolish. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound assertive. Nothing. Then the passenger window rolled down a finger's width. A hand reached out, tapping the driver's side window with an almost mechanical precision. No sound. No door opened. No one stepped out. The car idled with an unsettling, radioactive patience. I stood there a long minute waiting for some human reaction, a shuffling of feet, a phone buzz. Nothing came. The car's interior remained a dark cave, and I felt my face burn hot with foolishness as I walked back inside. For the next 2 days, the car was here. Gus would sit by the window and watch, never barking. Ben arrived the following weekend with his big binoculars and skeptical face, spending an afternoon on my roof. He told me to slow down on the paranoia and advised getting plates or calling the cops if someone was following me. That night I tried to do just that when I saw the sedan again. Dialing 911, the dispatcher said, without a clear threat, there wasn't much they could do. I was told to call back in the morning with a description. I felt ridiculous yet safe enough to be ignored. Strange occurrences began to pile up. My phone, normally charging fine on the nightstand, failed to charge and showed only a black screen. The cheap porch camera recorded an empty street with one bizarre anomaly. A black rectangle about a meter across right where the car had been. Watching the video frame by frame revealed nothing. One instant the street existed, the next a column of nothing. Then the street again. The camera logged the clip with a timestamp of 2137. The garage DVR told a similar story, a brief patch where the feed went grey, then returned. Attempting to play the missing fragment on my laptop, the media player simply stalled. A week later, I saw the car from the intersection at the end of the lane and drove up behind it. My plan was to follow at a reasonable distance, hoping the driver would turn so I could get the plate. I maintained a perfect 50-yard gap, like a shadow. The car never seemed to adjust its speed. We passed one stoplight, then another. At the second light, the car in front eased forward, and then, without warning or signal, it vanished. The road ahead was empty, with the GPS showing a solid line. I checked the mirror for brake lights. Nothing. I sat on the horn briefly, and then the car reappeared at the next bend, idling at the curb as if waiting for me to notice something specific. I was near admitting the truth to myself. This wasn't random. This wasn't a simple prank. The perpetrator would need money and saint-like patience. Then they came to the door. It was a Tuesday. Rain fell like someone was rinsing the world. Gus wagged his tail but didn't bark when the knock came. The digital clock on my microwave flickered to 2:13 a.m. just as the first knock landed. 3 precise sounds echoed on the front step. When I opened the door, 2 men stood in darkness, their black umbrellas folded like swords, long coats draped over immaculate suits. They weren't what you'd expect at this hour. Their appearance was crisp, tailored suits, polished shoes, faces neither young nor old. Their expressions were neutral, but their eyes carried an unsettling intensity. The taller one spoke first, his voice reminiscent of a radio announcer, stripped of warmth. "Good evening," he said. My heart raced. I hadn't told anyone about the footage. The hidden SD card felt suddenly heavy in my drawer. "Who are you?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. The shorter man responded slowly, "We're with the office. We need to review the original file." I started to ask how they knew, then stopped. They seemed calm, almost reasonable. The tall one's hands spread open, palms up, a gesture that somehow felt both conciliatory and threatening. "You can hand it over, or we can wait," he said. A familiar stubbornness rose in me. I could surrender the SD card and potentially end this strange encounter, or I could resist. "I don't want anyone going through my things," I said. "If you're law enforcement, show a badge." They exchanged a look, that knowing glance people share when they understand something privately. "We are not law enforcement in the familiar sense," the tall one stated, as casually as reporting the weather. The shorter man added, "You reported no auditory disturbances," I answered slowly, my throat tight. Simultaneously they smiled, a practiced, synchronized movement that sent a chill down my spine. "Thank you for your cooperation," the tall one said. The shorter man nodded, tilting his head as if checking something off a list. Then they turned and walked away, stepping off the porch into the rainy darkness. No car waited. They simply vanished, like figures falling behind heavy curtains, leaving only the lingering memory of their strange visit. The nights rearranged themselves around that precise minute for a time. Gus stopped pacing to the window at 2:13. The porch camera never again showed the odd black rectangle. The car never came. I handed the SD card to Ben a few days later and told him the whole thing, abridged and messy. He asked to keep a copy. He ran the file through filters until it looked cleaner, but it never gave more than the same silver smear to an interested eye. He told me not to post it. He said he'd been phoned by someone who identified themselves as a reporter and asked what his source on outdoor phenomena was, then told the man he worked with freelance folks and to go away. After 2 men came and asked for the file, the nights went back to normal. The microwave clock no longer blinked at odd minutes. That doesn't mean the feeling left. I still check the trees when the wind dies down. I still wake up some nights and sit with my phone and watch the time change. I sleep. I go to work. I hike on the ridgeway when the weather is right. Once in a while, I pull the clip out and look at the smear of silver and wonder what the people on my porch had seen. They said so little. "We need to review the original file. We're not here to make trouble," and they left the problem where it had been, on one small shelf of my life, private and unsettled. I'm not saying I know what they were or what the car was. I don't. I know the clock on my microwave lit up at 23 for a while, and then it didn't. I know two men in black stood on my porch and asked a polite, strange question. And I know Gus is a lighter sleeper now, the way someone who's been paying attention to small things is lighter. Just after midnight, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I'd been half asleep, drifting in that soft space between dreams and waking. For a second, I thought it was my alarm, but it was a call from my friend Eric. I hesitated before answering. He never called this late unless something was wrong. "Hey," I muttered, rubbing my eyes. "Dude," he said immediately. His voice had that nervous edge I'd only heard a few times before. "What the hell did you send me? I didn't send you anything," I said, sitting up. "That picture, the one you just texted," I blinked at the glow of my screen. My messages app showed nothing. "What are you talking about?" "A photo," he said again. "You sent me a picture like 5 minutes ago." He stopped, exhaling. The street was the same rain stretch it had been for years, loud in the moment and now silent. His voice sounded strange, urgent. "There's something weird on my phone," he said. "A photo from your number." I denied sending anything. My phone showed no recent messages, no sent photos. The last thing I'd shared was a meme about our fantasy league 2 days ago. Eric insisted the image looked like it was from my neighborhood. "Describe what you see right now," he demanded. I told him I was in my dark bedroom, curtains closed, phone in hand. When I checked my gallery, nothing seemed out of place. The last picture was from the previous weekend. Then Eric sent the photo back to me. My stomach tightened as I looked at it. The image showed the woods at the edge of my street, pine and bare oak silhouettes, power lines crossing overhead. Suspended just above the trees was a pale, hazy glow. Not bright like a spotlight, but diffuse like an internally lit jellyfish. The boundary between the glow and the night was indistinct. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. "From you," Eric replied. "It literally says it's from your number." Neither of us spoke for a moment. I could hear his breathing. "Maybe your phone got hacked," Eric suggested half-heartedly. "But if that were true, why wasn't the image in my messages?" I moved to the window and peered through the curtains. The street was empty. The trees at the block's end stood dark and motionless. "I'm looking out my window," I said. "Nothing's here." Eric sent a screenshot of our message thread. My name was at the top, the timestamp matching when he'd called. "I'm coming over." I tried to protest, but he'd already hung up. I remained at the window, watching the street. No cars appeared. My eyes kept returning to the mysterious photo, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The park entrance was a familiar sight, a slight incline that felt like it started right from the sidewalk at the block's end. I pulled up my camera app and studied the image's metadata. It showed the photo was taken at 12:03 a.m., but offered no additional details. No GPS coordinates, no device information, just an image.jp file. Eric's text came at 12:20 a.m. "I'm outside." I threw on a hoodie and headed downstairs. When I opened the door, he was standing by his running car, phone in hand, looking visibly unsettled. "You're sure you didn't send this?" he asked again. I confirmed I hadn't. He turned his phone toward me, the photo still faintly glowing on the screen. It was taken at the park entrance, with power lines clearly visible. We walked down the street together. A dry cold crept through my layers, making me shiver. Our footsteps rang out unusually loud, as if the air itself was hollow. At the park entrance, everything appeared completely normal. The wooden sign, the gravel path, the trees dark against the night sky. "No glow," Eric muttered. I kept scanning the tree line, half expecting something to change. Nothing did. "You still have the photo?" I asked. He nodded, holding up his phone. "It looks like it's right here, over those trees." I stared where he pointed, seeing only darkness. We stood there for a long time. Eventually, Eric suggested, "Maybe someone spoofed your number, some kind of prank." But I countered, "Then why does the picture look like it was taken here?" He had no response. We returned to my house in silence. He didn't even come inside, just got in his car and left. Upstairs, I sat on my bed's edge with the lights off, my phone on the nightstand. I kept checking messages, waiting for something new to appear. Nothing happened. When I opened my gallery, the same old photos remained. No trace of that glowing shape. But with my eyes closed, I could still see it hovering over the trees, faint and silent, like a lantern suspended underwater. The next morning, Eric's text arrived. The photos gone from my phone. When I asked what he meant, he explained that the image was blank. as if it never existed. I checked our message thread. His screenshot from the previous night remained, but the image he'd received was now just a grey box with a question mark. I scrolled through my photos again. Still nothing new. What happened that night remains a mystery to both of us. I stopped by the park entrance after dark, looking up at the power lines and trees. Sometimes I half expect to see that pale, glowing shape again, waiting where only a camera can catch it. The night was thick with fog, the kind that hangs in the streets like forgotten curtains. It made the world feel smaller. My van's parcel bay was half full, and I'd completed my usual route through the warehouses and flats by the waterfront. Most of Dundee had emptied for the night. It gets quiet after 11. You could almost hear the fog swallowing sounds. The radio was my first hint that something was off. I always keep it tuned low, some background noise to stay alert. For a while, everything seemed normal, just a local late-night show. But as I turned onto Lochie Road, it went to static. Not the familiar fade-out hiss, but a thin, insect-like static that rose and fell like breath near the aerial. It flickered for a second, then cut to a mechanical silence, as if someone had pressed mute on the world. The head unit's display blinked. I thumbed the dial. Nothing. Dial. Then it returned. Another thin sweep of static, then silence again. This wasn't a regular signal dropout. It felt like a hesitation in the air. I told myself it was just interference from old buildings, or the van's aging wiring. Saying it out loud made it feel less like my imagination was playing tricks. Street lights blurred into halos that didn't reach the pavement. The terraces on Tay Street had their curtains drawn, as if the houses were shy. The usual night workers were mostly gone, no one smoking outside kebab shops, fewer buses running, fewer sounds to orient myself by. Even the dogs were quiet. The city's constant nighttime hum had been reduced to a mere tick. Then the van itself started acting strange. The engine was warm and steady, but for a heartbeat, the dashboard lights dimmed slightly, like someone had briefly tightened a hand on the electrics. It was quick, barely a second, and the heater fan continued spinning as if nothing had happened. I checked the connections, but everything seemed normal. I left the rear van doors open to let fog drift through the back, preventing the packages from lingering. My day started normally. I put the van into gear, pulled up, and everything felt ordinary. I was one of those little failures you shrug off when nothing major happens. The fog inside the bay made everything soft and out of focus. I had a parcel for a first-floor flat. Climbing the steps, the stairwell lights dimmed as if being watched. A woman answered the door, her hair in a towel, looking like she'd expected noise but received silence instead. She said nothing about it. People don't always comment on what they notice. It's easier to let odd things slide. Back in the van, the radio was acting strange again. Static, silence, static. I sat with the heater on, watching droplets beat against the window. My scanner beeped, giving a new delivery code by the docks. Dave from dispatch initially came through clearly, but then his voice flattened, hissed and returned, as if swallowed and spat out. He asked if I could take an extra parcel. I agreed without thinking, not wanting to be the driver who says no. The call dropped. The headset showed no signal, then was fine 10 seconds later. Driving toward the docks, the fog seemed to hug the van tighter as I approached the river. An unfamiliar smell lingered, a faint tang, metallic and slightly sweet, like forgotten pennies. It reminded me of old hospitals and preserved specimens. I told myself the thought was ridiculous. Near the old weathered warehouses, the fog briefly thinned. A pale light hovered over the rooftops, the third strange occurrence, and the first that felt like a genuine thing rather than a glitch. Not a street light or lamp, but a soft white glow about the size of a slow-moving cloud pocket, level with the terrace roofs. It floated motionlessly, hanging like a lantern in the wrong place. I pulled over. You stop when you see something unusual, mostly to look without appearing. Foolish in heavy traffic. There was no traffic. The pause was brief, but the glow remained, an odd beacon over the rows of houses hanging silently. The night was eerily quiet. No sound, no movement. The fog hung low, thick and still. Street lights barely pierced through, and the rooftops remained dark with shuttered windows. The radio dissolved into static, like a curtain being drawn across sound. A glow shot upward with such sudden intensity that my stomach lurched. It rose straight through the fog, as if someone had lifted an invisible wand from the ground. No arc, no trailing light, just a momentary clearing in the dense atmosphere before vanishing into the cloud layer. No accompanying sound, no wind. It was like stepping between worlds. Instantly, the radio cleared. Dave's voice came through the headset, asking about my parking location. "Chest too quick," I replied. He mentioned losing my GPS signal momentarily, which matched my own disorienting experience. My hands shook, though I convinced myself it was just nerves. The transition felt bizarrely smooth. 1 second disrupted, the next perfectly normal. I completed my deliveries, gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. The city gradually resumed its typical hum. A pub door slammed somewhere. A taxi rolled past. I stopped at a late-night van for coffee where 2 workers were casually discussing a football match. They hadn't noticed anything unusual in the fog, or if they had, they weren't talking. People often choose silence during strange moments, preferring to compare notes later. Returning to base, my dashboard clock skipped 30 seconds before settling. My phone's battery, previously low, now showed a full charge. Small inconsistencies began accumulating. A missed scanner log, a route taking slightly longer than expected. These details were minor but left a dull, lingering, metallic sensation. Unloading the final crates, I tried discussing the experience with Kenny, who parks nearby. He simply shrugged, remarking that fog plays tricks when you're tired. And perhaps he was right. Exhaustion as a way of rearranging reality's familiar patterns. I was working in flight of Farmington. The sky was clear, with a slim moon hanging overhead. No unusual weather. He'd heard a rumor about drones, and he'd taken from someone a he depot, told in a way, was past story, past small hope. By him, he left he fog had cleared from mine roads, becoming a mishar, would blow away by morning. He drove home, he radio playing low. A cheeky presentral, still arcing pair, still arcing. Something felt fidgety inside him. An old man on his sree waved as he passed, and he waved back. Ha! Look of weighing was on he man's face. A he house he locked up and saying, he kitchen la seeming. A circle of condensed iron formed on he window where he sree lampkas a faint halo. He didn't share everything with his partner. Only he passer sounded reasonable. A radio going off and on, odd bar eerie readings. A bright light and he fog her she off. She made ye nodding in way she does when his work geo's strange. She asked if he was all right, and he said he was. Boo, he rule was differenti. He kept hinking about he quick disappearance of he light, and he proceeding silence. He radio's sudden clarity was he one reliable detail amidst an eye of small misbehaviors. La. He rewetched he dash cam clip. Fog. He van, he sree, and in one frame a pale blur rising. On replay, he footage skipped like bad splice work. One frame, whiffy blur, he next gone. He audio rack showed a side blur, hen, clear speech. I'm Sam's didn't align with his walk by a few seconds. Ha. Nigh. He slept poorly, waking a rain at dawn. Kids played outside while he seen row about his usual business, scraping, sweeping, opening. He fog remained only, in small puddles and a damp smell on washing lines. He drove a worky next day, making his rounds. Bry, ordinary roads, buses running on time, people rearing from holidays. Boo, in qui moments, when feeling he cast lay in a low grey evening, he'd find himself listening for radio say-saw sounds underneath everything. Mostly he heard nothing. Sometimes he'd carelessly glance. He roof ops. He memory res like a small, unlabeled hing in a drawer. Precise enough to feel real, he slippery enough avoid being pinned down. Nye has a way of shrinking your perspective. I was rimmed for 555 via 0, autopilot, humming, a half-empty Hermos inside he console. Radios whispered into me in lair, a faint flight handoff. Here, a distant cargo, ruck on 121.5 murmuring from far away. This was a routine leg I'd flown countless times. We left window, something caught my eye. A he first glance. I looked like a star. Oh, something was off. I was too close, positioned about he same angle as he win IP. Maybe 5 or 6 miles he left dead level will. No blinking. No nav lights. No strobes. just a dark-hearted shape hath-themed absorb his story. I initially reassured myself I was just some unexpected Rafik, maybe a crop duster or bannero. I checked he ransponder, ogled ident, and scanned for T-cast warnings. Nothing. My EFIs showed he usual blank space where Rafik would appear. Iransponder was Ransbing he ADSB box displaying he earlier heard Rafik. Equipment seemed normal, yet his object held his position like I belonged in our lane of sky. I called Cessna 7KQH visual Rafik, left 2 o'clock, same alert, say in engines. The response came back clear and praised. 7KQH Cessna, Roger. We show no primary or secondary arch in your area. My name present heading and altitude, copy, I replied. I double-checked he heading, glanced a he GPS rack, and looked again. He object had my ground, rack and speed, moving like I was glued of our Velocia vector, no perfectly aligned, like woe planes, sidling up, while maintaining an impossible situation. Disengaging he Upalo, I move he Yoko feel he Morian. I banked left 3DA for be a view N. I did something impossible to describe. I rolled, no banked or earned, by brood, as if gravy had loosened his grip. Sideways on an axis, slow and lazy, unlike any airplane's movement. I slid laterally, opposed to my bank, with a fluidity like a model gliding through us. No acceleration. No plume, no wake. I simply moved. We could have been dance partners, his unpredictable movements complicating our shared choreography. Right now the traffic was holding exactly parallel, rolling away to the west. Static hummed briefly before the controller answered. A moment I now know meant they were running the scope to check primary returns. I called center again, my voice steadier than I felt. Negative 7K. No targets. Are you receiving any interference? My headset had that small, precise noise radios make when something seems off, like when the squelch is being coaxed. I systematically checked my systems. Flipped to ground frequency, confirmed the squelch. Checked standby, toggled the audio panel. Nothing was amiss. All systems behaved normally. PTO heat on. Vacuum steady. Alternator green. The panel clock blinked, then resumed. A list of ordinary things doing ordinary things, and the extraordinary thing outside doing nothing that fit. I reached for the binoculars under the glare shield, cold and damp to the touch, as if they'd been somewhere colder before. Holding them up, I got the shape, vague, geometric, unlike the rounded belly of most aircraft. The edges appeared matte, not reflecting landing light at all, but the silhouette was crisp. No windows, no tails, no prop blur at the scales involved. I would have expected something to flicker or shimmer. Instead, it just existed and matched us. When I turned for a head-on view, it did something else. It banked right, and I nudged the throttles to keep airspeed steady, avoiding climbing or handing control back to the autopilot. The object didn't follow in a straight chase. Instead, it reversed momentum, sliding away as if tethered on a nearly invisible string that someone had suddenly released. The roll completed like a lazy turn, then drifted. I'm being clumsy with words because I don't have a better description. Sideways down the horizon, with no noise, no thermal wake, like a whirl of smoke dispersing, only in reverse. I called approach on the guard channel, gave my tail number, reported traffic visually at 1 o'clock, matching my altitude and gliding parallel. Approach 7KQH, excuse me, can you verify if any aircraft are in OMA sector? They responded quickly, 7KH, negative. We have no targets on primary in that sector. We're showing your transponder and other known traffic, but nothing else. So I asked the only question that mattered. At some point during the flight, something peculiar happened that defied explanation. The silhouette I was observing narrowed and brightened like a lens-bending light. I thought it might reveal itself as a strobe or exhaust, some simple physical phenomenon. Instead, it tightened into a point, and then, without any transitional phase or visible mechanism, it simply vanished. One moment, an indigo cut was visible against the lower sky. The next, it was gone. No transit across the stars, no streak. The place where it had been was empty, like someone had lifted a bird cage. After that, small details in the cockpit began to feel unsettled. My watch, a cheap pilot's model, was 5 minutes fast and then mysteriously corrected itself. The thermos on the console slid for no reason when I returned to neutral trim. My phone, which I had set to record, now contained a single corrupted, unopenable file and another with just 3 frames showing a dark smear before turning to an unsupported blackness. I reported this to the controller, who marked it for the engineers but didn't request the file. They simply asked if I wanted to divert. I did not. There was nowhere that made sense to go. We continued to Farmington as if resuming course after passing through an insignificant fog. My hands hovered above the yoke during approach, feeling safer not touching it directly. The wind held steady, the runway appeared, and the landing was precisely the kind of bright, controlled descent these instruments train you for. On the ground, I taxied slowly, leaving the lights on because the cabin still held an odd electric coolness I couldn't explain. At the FBO, I filled out paperwork and tried to get someone to examine the files. Maintenance checked my transponder traces, ATC printout, and GPS log. They found nothing unusual except a tiny GPS track anomaly showing a half-second ground speed blip. The controllers sent me the radar tape. Where we'd been, everything appeared clean. This sort of thing happens sometimes at night. One of them said, as if that explained anything. I didn't expect an answer. I didn't think there would be a report. Now I was driving home late one night, just outside Ashtabula, when the fog rolled in thick and heavy. My name's Dave Hollis, born and raised in this part of Ohio. I'd worked nights at a gas station in town, so foggy drives weren't new to me. But this night felt different. About 5 miles past Geneva, heading west toward home, something strange happened. Headlights appeared through the mist. Nothing unusual at first, except these weren't normal. They seemed to float in the fog, getting closer but never actually passing me. No engine sound, no tire noise on the wet road. Just 2 steady beams cutting through the grey. I slowed down, watching the lights. They stayed directly in front of me, maybe 100 yards away, moving as if they wanted to meet me. When I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder to give the other driver room, the lights simply stopped, hanging there in the fog. A soft glow then appeared about 50 yards down the road, blue, white, and hazy. It wasn't like any car light or street lamp I'd seen. Just floating, maybe 3 or 4 feet off the ground, clear yet somehow undefined. Later, when I got home, I filed routine incident notes, but I told my wife an abridged version, not wanting to sound unstable. That empty patch of sky kept turning over in my mind. When I talk about it, people look for explanations. Weather balloon, experimental drone, a trick of the eye. None of those fit what I saw. Something has changed in me. Now I check everything twice. The transponder, the squitter, the frequency, the wing flex, even the thermos under the glare shield. I still fly at night. It's my job and I've done it a long time. But when I'm on the leg to Farmington and something dark sits where a star used to be, I call it in a little sooner. The controller always says nothing is showing. They always do. No, I was driving through dense fog near Ashtabula when something strange happened. A light suddenly shot straight up into the sky, as if someone had flipped a switch. It moved in a smooth, fast line and vanished into the clouds above. The moment it lifted, an eerie silence descended. Every sound disappeared completely. The distant crickets, cars on the highway, even the hum of my truck, all went quiet. It felt like the entire world had paused for a heartbeat. I sat frozen, stunned by the absolute stillness around me. After a moment, I turned off the truck's engine and rolled down the window. Nothing, no birds chirping, no breeze rustling, not even the usual crackling of insects in the weeds. Complete silence blanketed everything. When I finally started the truck again, the mysterious headlights were gone. The fog had thinned slightly, and gradually the normal nighttime sounds began to return. I continued driving, my eyes constantly scanning the shadows and movements in the woods beside the road. The rest of the drive passed without incident, but I couldn't shake an unsettling feeling. It was as if something had silently slipped past me in that fog. Back home, I carefully checked the locks and sat by the window, staring out at the dark road. I still can't explain what that light was or what it was doing out there, but I know I wasn't imagining the profound silence that followed. If you ever find yourself driving through thick fog near Ashtabula late at night, pay close attention to those headlights. Note I apologize, but the text you provided seems to be incomplete or contains significant typos. Could you provide the full, correctly spelled text that you want me to rewrite without the complete original text? I cannot accurately rewrite or restructure the content while maintaining its original meaning.